That's good. All right. Everyone all settled in?
Please.
All right. I would like to call to order this February 15th, 2024 meeting of the Home Rule Commission. As far as preliminary matters go, I believe I can turn the roll call over to Matt.
Thank you. Dalton Villette,
Here.
Mike Foster,
Present.
Clint Folsom,
Here.
Jeff Chu,
Here.
Heather Craycraft,
Here.
Claire Dixon,
Here.
Chris Hansen,
Here.
Ryan Hitchler,
Here.
Ryan Welsh.
No. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Foster. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Folsom. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next, we have public comment. Individuals are encouraged to make public comments, but please be respectful of the 5-minute time limit, making statements either in person or virtually. And please be respectful of commissioners' time and town staff time during the meeting itself. Any questions from the public can be asked of the commissioners and town staff before or after the meeting. Do I have any public comment in the room?
Hello, Celeste Landry. I live in Boulder. Two things. One is that there's been a correction to the statement that Tabor does not allow the town to run its own elections. And Catherine Sellers can clarify that more. But I don't think that means you want to run your own elections. I think it's a lot of work, but I just want that clarification to be known. The second thing is on section 3.01, that's where you elect the mayor and council members, and you elect them for 4-year terms. I think you might want to include something in there about how many you elect each cycle. Right now, it doesn't say at all. And do you want to elect all of them and then not have an election for 4 years, or do you want to elect half the council members and then 2 years later elect the other half of the council members? And in the third part of 3.01, it mentions staggered terms. So I know that the state statutes often talk about in the year zero, ending in 00, and every 4 years thereafter. They use language like that. So anyway, just something for you to consider. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any additional comment? Hearing none from the room. Any virtually? Hearing none. Public comment is closed.
Hey, Dalton, can I just ask a question about that?
Yeah,
to
of course.
The attorney. Doesn't that, so 3.013, doesn't that take care of the stagger? So it would be forced?
Let me get there really quick. 3.013.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you're staggered now,
Yeah.
and you're not changing anybody's term. So when
Right.
you shift to home rule, everybody's term is just going to end in the same manner. So your staggering is already there.
Yeah.
But That's in
If for
case-
some reason, though,
Yeah,
something
in case-
happened, the staggered went away,
Right.
the next
that's-
election would fix that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
then you can also rely on state law for that. It doesn't need to be in the charter.
okay.
Any additional questions, comments before moving on to our next agenda item, which is second review? All right, we can go to second review, Article 5.
I'm going to apologize in advance, okay? You would not have wanted me to be here last time.
Excuse me, I've got one little thing on Article 4. So I know we've done it twice already, but this just caught my eye as I was reading through. So 4.03. where it talks about municipal judge removal. In all of the other sections, we moved removal down to the bottom, and this one's in the middle. So just for consistency purposes, I think 3 should be after 5. Subsection 3 should perhaps be moved after 5.
Yeah. I think I'm all right with that. Any other thoughts on moving that down? Okay. Article 5. Thank you, Clint. Jeff?
So, I mean, first little one is it boards, commissions, and committees? Small little nit, since you do talk about committees down below.
We discussed.
Talked about
Yeah.
that last time. It's up to you all what you want to do.
501(2) says boards, commissions, and committees.
Yeah, we had some discussions on having just kind of the broad boards and commissions and committees falling kind of underneath that.
Okay, but every one of the individual paragraphs calls out committees. So it's exactly that.
So you're saying it should have the word committees in the underneath in the title, okay,
Each one of the things says boards, commissions, and committees, boards, commissions, and committees.
okay.
And we have more committees than we do commissions, so.
Heather,
Yeah.
And my question was, I thought we were combining a lot of these, or did we even need them at all? When we roll over to 5.02 and
That's right.
03 and 04. So,
Yeah,
not
that's-
to
that's
answer your
correct.
question, Jeff, but I thought we were cleaning this up a little bit.
correct, yeah, I think
What
that,
it's worth, just having boards and commissions and not mentioning committees at all doesn't prevent you from having committees. So it's all kind of a descriptive word, but it's whatever you.
Well, it's just the inconsistency, because
No,
all
I
the
know.
paragraphs reference committees.
And,
so it's
but
not-
they specifically asked to make sure I kept the committees in that language, so that's why I left it in there.
What's the difference between a commission and a committee? Is there, what's the,
Nothing?
nothing really? It's the
Nothing
same
legally,
thing.
anyway, yeah.
No legal
just a way-
difference or
And I
the
think,
definition?
I think Superior uses them, committees more for their
Interchangeably.
advisory committees, is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, so it's
But if
just,
someone's looking for advisory committees, we're gonna look on the table of contents, we'll find the committees. Anyway,
But so I thought that is it the Historical Commission? Wasn't it named the commission because there's a very specific purpose for that? I thought that they had to be a commission because of what they
Testing
do.
my memory. I'd have to go back and look through our files.
I think I'm older, so my memory may not.
As a member of the Historical Commission, I do know that the rationale with that at the time is because of its age and the kind of unique status that the Historical Commission has in regards to term limits specifically. So they are currently no term limits on the Historical Commission for members, unlike a lot of the other advisory committees. And at the time when that was founded, that was kind of the norm way back, I think it was the late 90s when it was formed. And at the time, it was just that and Planning Commission. And then with the committees, they mandated term limits and terms for the individual members. But I don't know if any other distinguishing factors for the Historical Commission kind of beyond that point.
I thought there was something about,
I mean, I wouldn't doubt that there was something in relationship to, since like the Historical Commission can make judgments on properties and things like that there may be some, not to overspeak, quasi-judicial kind of thing, just like the Planning Commission does and things along those lines. If there's something that lets them make some determination, whereas the committees are all advisory committees.
yeah.
And they all give suggestions to the board as opposed to.
Does it have something to do with budgets too and managing money or spending their own money or something like that, or?
Not that I'm aware of.
I know Historical Commission goes through the same process as all the other
committees?
advisory groups when it comes to budgeting.
Okay.
I don't know if you make determinations on
Yeah.
that's historical property or that's not, as opposed to the board doing it at one level.
No, we usually, if there is a recommendation on a historical property, I mean, there aren't any recommendations in my tenure for a new historical property in Superior, but the board would kind of make that determination. The commission would kind of put forward resolution and
Maybe there's
kind of
something
pitch the
historically from
board.
that standpoint.
Yeah.
so as to Jeff's suggestion, I'm fine adding the word committees to the title. I don't have any strong feelings about that one way or the other.
Like boards, commissions, and committees?
Sure.
Sure.
Sure. And then
Okay.
just, I would make sure that just throughout this section, then we just keep that language consistent throughout.
Yes.
Any other items in section 5?
All 5 or 501?
Well, we talked about 02, 03, and 04, removing them.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what you said? Oh, because you want to move them to the open space sections?
Well, just not call out the committee names because we're not calling out all of them. And this calling them out would preclude future changes in name, future, whether you wanted them or not. And it just, it seemed better practice to just leave 5.01, which would allow future boards to define, do them.
So we'll have an open space section down below, but the fact that you need a planning commission and a board of adjustment, I mean, if you don't put them in there, then you're not saying they're required to have all the time, right? The purpose of the charter is to say we always want to have a planning commission that's going to look through all these things and make recommendations to the board on approval or not to look at all of it. So if you get rid of it, then you're basically saying a future board could not have a planning commission. And it seems to me that you want to have a planning commission, that whole process of reviewing development plans and other things should go through a planning commission.
We did talk about that last
So
meeting.
typically the philosophy when you see planning commission, board of adjustments a little bit, that one's not as typical, but the philosophy is that basically you need a charter amendment to get rid of them. So the governing body would be bound to have a planning commission and they couldn't dissolve it. So what you're saying, you
Right.
take it out of there?
Yeah, I don't think
Get
you
it
should.
rid of
I
it
think-
tomorrow.
I think long-term and everything else like that, I think that's what you want to have, is the planning commission. I mean, that's how our process.
But didn't you say some cities don't have one?
Yeah, that's true. Some cities don't have them at
Yeah.
all.
And
But
it's
you're
just- but-
big enough. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about your development and like what the future might look like. and-
Yeah, I don't foresee a time when we wouldn't need them, but I also can't see, 100 years into the future as to what, whether or not that's necessary or not. And
I guess I would say, why change it now? We have it. Let's leave it in there. I don't see any, again.
but the purpose of this is to make it flexible for future, way into the future, be able to change it if there was a desire to not have it, make the board be the planning commission. Okay.
I mean, I would take a different take. I don't think the purpose of the charter is to make everything easier for the board to do whatever they want. I think the purpose of the charter is to define how do we want the town to run, what do we think should be in there. And I think the point of looking into the future is to say, well, we don't want to hamstring people in the future if there's a real reason for something not to be there. But the fact that you could do a charter amendment for having the planning commission, why would you take it out right now? Why would you change stuff? Because especially when we go to, and this is one of the thoughts for later on conversation, we go to try to sell this to the public, right? To say why we want to have it. I mean, I think a lot of the list of things is going to be, how is this different than what we're running today? And what additional things does it afford us because we're doing this home rule charter? Getting rid of the planning commission does nothing for us today. It doesn't really hurt us in the future. Why do we want to have to defend, well, potentially you don't have a planning commission? So I just don't see any reason to start eliminating some of these things just because we want to offer flexibility for the future. There is flexibility. It's an amendment, a charter amendment.
Which requires a vote of
Sure.
the
Planning
whole
commission's
town.
a big thing.
Yeah.
So did we decide to remove that from?
No, you just, my notes are, is it for removal? I don't think you decided.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We started that conversation.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because, so the way it's written now, it's just like the Board of Adjustments. It's up to the board to decide who's going to be on the Board of Adjustments. And it could be the same thing for the Planning Commission. So the board could be the Planning Commission, just like they could be the Board of Adjustments.
Which they are in some,
Which they are
in some
now.
towns.
Yeah, they are
Yeah.
currently. So, yeah, I
Or,
mean,
yeah, we are
the
now.
the town council could say, we're going to be all three of these things.
So if there comes a time when the Planning Commission goes way of the Board of Adjustments, which there's really not much for them to do, so there's no need to have a specified separate board, then the the council could make themselves a planning commission and did just convene when there was something that had to be discussed from a planning commissioner point of view.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about Superior's land use code. You probably all know much more than I do, but typically, if there's a two-step process, that would make the planning commission, you'd have to make the planning commission probably the final decision maker in that scenario, because you wouldn't want the town council sitting as the planning commission and then also sitting as the decision maker. It'd just be so many extra steps, right? So you'd have to adjust everything, and planning commission would have to become probably a final decision maker, which if it's the town council sitting as it, that kind of gets you to the same place.
Yeah, but I think the point, I don't know if Clint, you were making this point, but there could be a time in the future when you don't need a planning commission because everything's built out, but there's going to come those points like maybe there's another flood and you need to have the planning commission review the rebuild. Then the board could just convene as the planning commission, right? I mean, it's not like they would be doing it every month. It could be periodic. And until that time, they have a separate planning commission in place.
This doesn't require a planning commission to meet and have meetings if there's
Right.
nothing going on, right?
So I think in that regard, I agree with Jeff. Why not leave it in there and leave the Board of Adjustment in there? And then the board at the time can decide how they want it to be set up.
That's why you guys get the big bucks.
So as this is written, as these two are written, does it allow for that flexibility? The flexibility of not having a separate group serving on these, well, serving as planning commissioner or serving as Board of Adjustment? And does it allow for change? I mean, so right now we have a separate planning commission. We want to maintain that. We don't want any change of that. But at some point, 50 years from now, if the volume of work is just de minimis, or you've got no or very little public interest in people serving on it, and thus the board at the time wants to become the planning commission, does this as written allow that? Okay.
Yeah, I think it does. So by ordinance,
Okay.
I think you could appoint the town council as either, planning commissioner, as they are
Okay.
the Board of Adjustment.
I'm
and
fine, yeah.
They would, yeah.
So was there something we changed before? Because I remember we had this conversation about serving on the planning commission. Was there something else that said board members couldn't serve on some of these committees and commissions? I remember we had that conversation when I was telling you guys, oh yeah, we were on the planning commission before.
I know the board.
So was that earlier? So we may be prohibiting ourselves in the earlier board section.
Under
Let's go back.
section 3.
Or
Yeah.
maybe we deleted, I don't remember.
No, that's a good point. You don't want to have a contradicting.
I know, Jeff, one of the discussion items that we had in particular for those commissions and talking about kind of removal, was just, should we then also include all the other advisory groups that we have? At what point do we mandate certain commissions, and what options then do we either enumerate them? Should we always have a mandated historical commission? Should we always have a cultural arts and advisory group?
Yeah, 3.042.
But are we deleting that?
Yeah, I think we're deleting it.
Yeah.
A town,
So we'd have to get rid of.
or a town or board commission, or yeah, you'd have to take that out.
But-
So you could be both.
Yeah.
I think, we're deleting that though, right? Isn't that the note in here already?
No, we deleted the stuff over in the side.
Of, yeah.
This is the edit. We deleted this section 2.
What is that? This is where it says, am I reading this wrong?
This is what stays.
So out of line, this is out of line, this section. It's already missing in this one. The inline changes.
Oh, I got you, yeah.
But I mean, and to be honest, if that kind of change needs to happen, then it's
Your mic's not on.
right. I mean, if that kind of change is really happening, that you want to say, oh, we're gonna get rid of the commission, or we're gonna do something. Yeah. I kind of see where you're going at. I would not want to get rid of it now. I guess I can see if the charter amendment needs a vote of the entire electorate for just eliminating the. Yeah. So maybe this is the place to address it from that standpoint, up front, saying that they can serve.
I'm of the opinion they have the power to create and dissolve these commissions and committees. The belt and suspenders to hamstring them, let's say 100 years from now, like to Clint's point.
Well,
There's, like, the planning commission meets, they don't talk about anything. They're like, why are we here? Because the charter says you shall have a planning commission.
but actually doesn't say you shall meet. I mean, I think that was Catherine's point.
It's like the Board of Adjustments.
It doesn't have to meet until there's anything to be there.
Yeah,
But
so
if
why
you
is it in the
wanna-
language?
But if you're going to convene a group for a purpose,
If you have a
they
group.
they need to know that they're going to do something. No one's going to show up to be the planning commission if there's nothing for them to do.
But again, back to the Board of Adjustments, I mean, that was changed for the town trustees to be on the
Right.
Board of Adjustments. And
Correct.
they meet when they need to meet.
Correct.
So I would say do the same thing for the planning commission.
I would say address it in here, address it in this section to allow the board members, should it be done by ordinance or however else we want to phrase it. But I just think trying to eliminate some of the things that are there and have largely been there a long, long time, and we're still going to need them for the foreseeable future. Why do we want to address that, even in trying to move this home rule?
Doesn't the code also talk about a tree board, and the town board serves as a tree board? They probably don't meet regularly as a tree board, but they are the tree board?
That's correct, yeah.
So maybe in 3.042, some reference to town board members can serve on the committees by ordinance.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
the board decides that
Yeah, if the board decides
such and
it's
such
appropriate to
committee
do.
is no longer able to stand on its own for whatever reason, but you still want the ability to, I think that it probably makes sense to keep the planning commission and board of adjustment in this section, just keep these paragraphs as written because it allows for that flexibility, but somehow
Yeah, it's got to be.
make it consistent in 3.04 so we don't have the inability for board members to serve. Because right now, this contradicts the Board of Adjustment, the way we're doing it.
What would happen if this was approved by the voters and that wasn't caught and there was that contradiction? How would that work?
You have to
Yeah.
change it. You have to change the board of adjustment.
That's
You
why
might
we
be
meet
able-
many
sometimes-
times.
Sometimes you can pass an ordinance to kind of fix it in the midterm, but you'd need a charter amendment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good thing
That's
some
why
of
it's
us-
important when we get to the end,
Read
we start
everything.
over and go through the whole thing.
Those old people have some memory still. Seasoned
Okay, so
veteran.
having this, clarifying the language here, and now going back down to Article 5.
Yep.
Is it of the general opinion then to actually keep these sections, keep the open space advisory committee, planning commission, and board of adjustments, and maintain this language then?
I would say remove 5.02.
Yeah.
I agree.
Is that something that we could bring that sentiment down into the open space section?
To Article 12, right?
Because I like that, I like the compromise. I think Ryan came up with that idea
Yeah.
to have a resident-led committee as long as there is a fund, a special tax for that. But maybe that's better to move it down to the next section.
So just can we stick with the bottom two first or second, so I can, so are we keeping them, that's the consensus? Is that-
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes,
I
Yeah.
just-
Yes, head
Okay,
nods.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just so you know, I mean, Ryan's language is, my notes are on here, and he actually said there is a fund from open space.
Special
I just
tax.
offered a tax as an alternative. I don't know what exactly the right one is there. So just for your consideration.
Okay. Yeah, because right now we do still maintain the special tax for open space. I know we'd have to go through quite a process to adjust that, but I kind of like, in the last discussions with Ryan's point, if we're going to be talking about this section, moving it down to the open space section, I think that just makes for easier readability because we don't have a planning commission section. But if we do have an open space section, any sort of committee or advisory group, it feels like that would make sense to bring it up there.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
And I like the language, Catherine.
The tax instead of the
Yeah. I mean, I think it applies at this time, once we get there. Might morph it a little, but I think it's a good start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other kind of questions, thoughts?
So, yeah, the only thought with fund versus tax is if obviously we were fortunate that we didn't sunset the tax, which is good, but if something were to change later on and there was still money in the fund, even though you're still not actively taxing, wouldn't you still
Right,
want to
you
have
still
those
need to have a
recommendations?
committee to know how to spend it.
Yeah.
So that would be my only concern.
Would you prefer fund?
So I would prefer a fund along those lines.
Because fund implies tax.
Pardon me?
Well, there could be other sources of funding.
It could be money. You could sell a piece of property and build windmills up on the top of the hill there to block the airplanes. and
No,
then-
I mean, it precludes a tax, right? I mean, like, the tax could disappear, but the fund could still exist.
Right.
Yeah, there could be other
yes,
sources
yeah,
of funding that.
Yeah, sorry, Ryan, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's see, wait. So just out of curiosity then, even the Planning Commission, the Board of Adjustment language, so is that pretty much what the language is today from state statute wise for those two to exist? I'm just trying to think in my mind as we go forward, how do we talk about, yeah, this is exactly how we're operating today anyways, or these are the changes that we're doing?
It's probably somewhat similar. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's verbatim. I haven't, yeah. It might be somewhat similar.
Okay,
It's probably more robust, my guess is, than state law. And I can definitely look it up for you and let you know.
I mean, I just think long-term, that's one of the things we're gonna have to start just quickly itemize as we go forward. Okay.
Jeff, your question was about Board of Adjustments and what we.
Both the Board of Adjustments, I think I had a note here about it, like, is the Planning Commission advisory by state statute? Is it an advisory board or, those kinds of things
No,
in terms?
no. The statute's silent.
The statute's silent on whether it's advisory or just, okay.
The Board of Adjustment obviously has a special statutory purpose.
Right.
Which is not in here. So variances and appeals, and so there's no mention of exactly what the Board of Adjustment is for in the charter. But state law does distinguish what a Board of Adjustment is for.
So are you saying that by the language of Board of Adjustment ties it back to state statute in terms of what they're looking at from a variance perspective? Or are you saying we should include the variance piece in the language then?
I'm not advocating that you include the variance and appeals piece in the charter, but I guess my point is that the town council can determine what powers that Board of Adjustment
Right.
has. And so you could give it different powers, less powers than what's in state law.
Okay.
But I wouldn't, that's a lot of inflexible language for a charter.
You mean including all the state law stuff? Yeah. As opposed to referencing state statute or not, though? Or you want you think the Board of Adjustment does the Board of Adjustment need
I would let the
flexibility?
town council make choices, I guess is how I put it.
On that one, I can agree. All right.
The only incredibly minor point to these two sections is just for consistency's sakes, should we capitalize Planning Commission and Board of Adjustments within the paragraphs themselves? Because I see they're lowercase in the paragraphs.
We can, we capitalize town council, so that would make sense.
Just bring up, just the example in the Castle Pines, that, I mean, there's, under boards and commissions is very simple. It's two sections, and so the one is right to establish, and it says, "The city council shall have the authority to create and disband boards, commissions, and committees, and confer upon the same such powers and duties as it seems advisable by resolution or by ordinance." And then there's a second one about membership. So that pretty much, if we removed that, then they're still given the power to them to establish it without having to change the charter, right? Or remove them.
Sorry, can you
So-
sorry, I was typing while you were talking.
So if it looks like what Castle Rock can do, or Castle Pines, I'm sorry, they can establish, they can create or disband any boards, commissions, or committees and assign duties and all that kind of stuff. So they could say, we're going to set up a planning commission and we're going to have it for the next 5 years, and then they don't need to go and update the charter to get rid of it.
That's right, yeah, because Castle Pines just has those two
That's right.
sentences, that's it.
That's
Yep.
right. So I guess if we wanted to simplify this, I mean, then we would do something like Castle Pines does.
Yeah, but again, it goes back to, do you want to simplify the document or do you want to simplify the process for getting it approved as long as it's capturing what we're trying to intend? And right now, I feel like, yeah. this language is not overly burdensome at all.
Yeah, I
It's exactly
agree.
what we're doing
Yeah.
today, so.
Just wanted to bring it up, though,
Yep,
because
I
that's
appreciate
very
that.
simple. So, but either way, I'm fine with it.
Actually, the majority of this one's all been deleted anyways.
Well,
Pretty
if-
simple.
And I think we'll, like Catherine pointed out, we'll have another chance after we've slept on a few weeks of this and come back to this and either feel good about it or want to change it.
And of the two, I mean, now that we're kind of in this a little deeper, this Board of Adjustment, well, it says it'll do the duties assigned by state law and ordinances, but I mean, just having served for 8 years, I mean, I can probably count on one hand or one finger the time that we convened the Board of Adjustment. I don't know that we did. And so I guess the point is, we've got the power to create it or not. So, you know, if either of these two, I think that's definitely the least important to spell out. Perhaps Planning Commission, but I'm kind of on the fence still, as Chris was pointing out about, you know, do we leave it in there or not? Okay, I guess we just revisit this again.
Right, but Clint, I think you make a great point, and I would be supportive of removing Board of Adjustment. It just, that seems less, I don't want to say important, but Planning Commission certainly has more relevance.
Yes.
And I think I mentioned before, you know, some communities combine those into one body and they do the same function, so.
I didn't know
Like,
that. That's
like
interesting, yeah.
the town, like the Board of Trustees has absorbed it, you can make the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustment one body too.
Which could be in the ordinance when this is all done. The first ordinance
can
would
be in
be
the ordinance
assigning
when
those
it's all
duties to the
done.
Planning Commission. I can see that too.
But it's kind of it is kind of a final decision on disputes. So it's probably not something you would put, I don't think you would make the Planning Commission. I don't think it would make sense because they're, I mean,
It would
it's
be
like-
the same group of people and they would, when they sit as the Board of Adjustment, they sit as the Board of Adjustment, but then they sit separately as Planning Commission. They may have two titles and both sit on both boards.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think the function of what they're doing is kind of a last call on disputes, and I think you'd want your board or your council, I think you'd want your council doing that work
I see.
rather than a planning commission body serving as Board of Adjustments.
So to your point that way, right? I mean, in responding to Catherine that way, I was kind of like, yeah, the ordinance, whatever gets defined, can define however they want to at that point in time. I think, but to your point, what you're saying is you think it's necessary to have a Board of Adjustment or someone who's making that decision on those variances. Whether that role is a different board, whether that role is made by the town board.
I think that, in my opinion, is you would want the town board doing that because there would probably be some kind of appeal process anyway to the council. And I would imagine that anybody that got an unfavorable judgment from a planning commission body that had another group to, you know, appeal to would do that. It just becomes more cumbersome. It just becomes a lot more complicated than it needs to be.
I think, yeah.
So I think for the limited amount of time that it would be used, I think it makes sense to have the Board of Council doing that work.
But again, but if you're having a Board of Adjustment, I mean, the question is, are you saying have a Board of Adjustment, whether the council serves that role or not have a Board of Adjustment at all?
I think you have to have the mechanism to have a Board of Adjustment because I think the ordinances reference the need to, or the process by which to appeal things to a Board of Adjustment. So I think the body has to be there somewhere. I just don't know that we need to call it out in Article 5 and then let the council and future councils figure out, you know, do they want to do it or do they want to assign someone else to? I don't really have strong feelings about that. I mean, I have my own feelings about that, but
Right.
but I think calling it out in this section is probably should go.
Right, because 5.011 enables the town council to create a Board of Adjustment if they so deem, or they could put those responsibilities on themselves.
So right now, because I feel like we've jumped around a little bit on this key point. Would it be best to maintain this language with the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustments explicitly in here, or potentially scrapping them, leaving them kind of closer to the Castle Pines model, where it just has the very broad kind of powers that the board, the town council would have? What is kind of the thought process? Should we maintain this, the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustments explicitly, or just scrap it and it, with the current verbiage, would be closer to the Castle Pines one?
That's kind of where I'm actually was behind keeping them in, but now after reading the Castle Pines one, I mean, that gives them all the power to add it, take it away, do whatever they want. And so if the board feels like they have to have a planning commission and a board of adjustments, they can put it in. And it really simplifies the whole thing.
So again, I'll go back to the balance of the charter isn't necessarily to simplify everything to give as much power and make it as easy as possible on the board per se. It's to look at the overall citizens and everyone else, say, how are they best represented going forward, number one. Number two is we still have to get this passed. And so by not necessarily including some of these items in there, you're, again, making changes for I'm not sure what sake long-term or not. So leaving it in there, letting the board sit on those commissions if they want to, that seems like a good happy medium. You're not changing things whole hog here with respect to what the charter has and everything going forward, but you're also giving the flexibility you want.
Don't you think, though, that if you make it more flexible, that it's better for the citizens of the town? If it's more flexible?
I honestly don't necessarily. We're going to have some other conversations about a lot of stuff. Remember, this is government we're talking about, and so even with a board of adjustment, people want a board of adjustment. When I was on the board, there was a lot more, let's say, a lot more vocal people within the town, and by being able to appeal to a board of adjustments that's not the town board, I think they appreciated being able to have those conversations a lot more so than always having to come in front of the town board. So I think there's some.
So, yeah, this is one of those things, I'm not going to, follow my sword on this. And I think that it's fine the way it is, but I'm also really happy with making it really simple like Castle Pines. So either way, yeah, I'm fine with it.
All right.
Does that make it easy?
What is kind of some other individuals'
I'll
thoughts?
chime in. I'm with Chris on that, and I think that's why I wanted to bring it up again. So,
I mean, what's the worst case scenario if it's not in there and some future board decides that for some reason they do not want to have a planning commission? What effect might that have that could have been prevented, I guess?
They either serve on the, you mean, I miss, what's the premise?
If a board decides, well, we don't have to have a planning commission and we don't want one, so our town's not going to have a planning commission.
So if it's in here,
If it's not in, if we decide to take it out and there's no, and they don't have any reason why they should have to have a planning commission, and because it's not in there, they decide we don't want to have a planning commission, and what would happen if there was no planning commission?
Okay, Eddie,
Well, the board would establish one because they have the ability to establish.
she's saying
Well,
doesn't have
I
one.
think what she's saying, sorry if I
Yeah.
can. So I think what she's saying, if it's gone from here and the town council one day says, we just don't want that planning commission anymore.
Yeah.
What's the practical effect of that?
Yeah.
The practical effect is that the town council's going to make all your land use decisions, and there's
Okay.
not going to be that intermediate advisory
Okay,
board making.
so is that an outcome that we could tolerate?
I think the voters in the future would probably make that decision and say, you know what, no town board, or town council, we want a planning commission, create one, or not. It would really be up to the voters to.
So that would be a negative outcome if the town council just decided, you just have to come to us. We're not going to have a planning commission because we don't want one and everyone has to come to us.
But in our type of democracy, there could be consequences for the elected officials at that time.
Yeah.
And there could be political pressure
So
to create
so
one
It could just cause some like unrest, unhappiness
for a period of
for
time.
the people. And they would probably push to
Recall.
put a planning commission back into play, yeah.
Or even us trying to get this approved by
Well,
not having it there.
If there was, I'm envisioning the scenario where there is just not enough work for them to do, and that thus not people interested in being on a board that does no work. And so then for the occasional work that does come along, the board council, the council at the time could serve that function.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm,
Is there any other scenario in which, I guess, a planning commission that doesn't have a lot of work to do, but is still, a commission could still be a commission, even if they didn't meet regularly, but on the rare occasion that they needed to meet, they would meet? I mean,
Sure.
Well, this is what then, with the current language, it still allow for that
Yeah.
creation and maintenance of the planning commission.
yeah.
I think his point is that if you're not meeting regularly, it's
Then
hard
it's
to get
going to be really
members.
hard. Yeah, so I'm wondering, like,
They
how
you know,
for
forget
effective
what they
purpose.
are.
And I think that's the point of, then the board, if we're adjusting this section above, then the board can just say, I don't think anything comes forward, we'll serve that role.
Could-
Or like you said, if some other disaster happens and you have to have a whole bunch of new development, then you can assemble the commission again.
Or, yeah, say you only need a planning commission on a rare occasion, they could temporarily assemble a commission for a specific purpose and then disband it.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
allowable with the current language
Yeah.
in the first two sections.
Yeah.
All right.
I would support Chris's Castle Pines where we remove it and just keep it, whatever those two paragraphs were, which are very similar to what we
All
have
right,
at the top.
so
Sorry, I was just going to ask Catherine
Okay.
one question. If you had another thought, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we've talked about this fairly lengthy. Is kind of the consensus, eliminate this language, stick kind of with the Castle Pines, have this flexibility allowance in the beginning.
So my question, I was going to ask, so planning commission is always sort of a quasi-judicial function as well and everything else like that. So how does that fall into state statute for development process? So if we didn't have one, then, what drives that?
What drives what exactly?
The planning
Sorry.
commission and all the legal requirements around the planning commission.
Yeah,
And the fact that it is.
you're
a-
going home rule. You don't have to follow
I-
state
I
law, right?
understand.
So, I mean, that's the thing, you can look to that, but like, you're about, the goal is to become home rule. And so you need to decide how much you want to break from state law.
Right.
And so there's, the process for, your land use processes, they may all have to be relooked at if there's no planning commission and all that kind of stuff. And so you're not bound by any of that anymore. So I don't know if that answers your question, but, the function of the planning commission under state law, once you pass this charter, the town council is going to set that function
Right.
by this charter provision, if you keep it in there. Or even if you don't, they're going to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
But clearly there's reasons within state statute for having a planning commission. And the reason they have that from both multiple boards looking at it, different people looking at, the board looking at one thing is always a higher level than the planning commission looking at, the number of rocks and trees, right? They're very different roles of planning commission than it is at a town board approval. And so those public hearings and everything are very different actions, having served on both planning commission and the town board.
And I guess
So-
what I would offer is those statutes are very old. And that is not a recent thing. So you can take that either way, that, that's been historically, there's been a planning commission statute that's existed and they're part of the system. But those statutes don't get revisited to say, well, maybe that's really not something we want in there. We'll let municipalities choose if they want a planning commission. We don't need to put it in the state law. They just don't get revisited. That issue isn't revisited.
Right, but I'll say, having been on the planning commission and on the board, we looked at very different things on those two different.
Right, no, I
functions.
understand that, but
So-
that's created within your land use code
Right.
mostly, right? So,
Okay,
So just to put a bow on this, and for the benefit of all the media watching this, so you're not going to create the headline, Home Rule Commission disbands Planning Commission. We're not doing that. Whether or not this language remains in here, and I do agree we need to probably move on and maybe finalize this on a future meeting, but what we're advocating here for is the possibility of flexibility for future boards to make adjustments, but we are not disbanding the Planning Commission. It is a vital function today and probably through all of our lifetimes. But beyond that, it may change, and that's what we're That's really what we're talking about.
And just to go back to what state law allows a governing body to absorb all the planning commission duties.
Right, which is what we said we would do if we had addressed section 3.1.2 or whatever it was.
Right,
Yeah.
but I guess my point is even under state law, a governing body can absorb those duties.
Right, and by leaving it in here and leaving changes. But anyways, if you guys all want to go a different route, that's fine. I just think the more changes you make for 100 years from now, the more you have to figure out how you want to convince people that all these things are the right changes. You know, the point, it goes back to what is your purpose for the charter? And there's some flexibilities when I look at the charter that we want to accomplish, but some of these are just really are not going to change how things operate for the town for 100 years or more. And we've been around for 120 years now, so.
All right. Well, I think we've talked about this quite at length.
Consensus, because I'm not entirely.
Make a motion,
Yes.
someone please, so we can do that.
I don't know if a motion needs to be had. I feel like the consensus right now is, and correct me if I'm wrong, leaning towards Castle Pines, just having those first two sections, eliminating the language on here, and then we can move on to Article 6.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any sort of questions, comments, edits?
So why can't ordinance affect budget? You have in here, let's see where to go here. What's my question? It says, why not the budget as a let's see. Section shall not apply to budget adoption action.
Where are you reading?
I'm looking at the bottom of 601. However, this section shall not apply to the budget adoption or other appropriations defined in, oh, because you do the budgeting later on. Okay, never mind, I got it. Okay. Question?
Any other thoughts, questions?
So 603C, 603.1C? So is there anything that says, I didn't see anything in here requiring, you know, there's discussion, deliberation, but nothing about public comment on ordinances in the process.
Wait, can you repeat that, Jeff?
I don't see in section C, it says,
Yeah.
the public hearing, it says any discussion, deliberation, the council can vote, but it doesn't say about requiring public comment within there. I know it's a public hearing, it says that.
So even
Is that assumed
B?
in a public hearing?
Well, that's the question.
Public comment is assumed in a public hearing?
Yeah, but that's only right if it's required to have a public hearing.
And I think I asked this before, but how do we, when would an ordinance be required to have a public hearing?
So legislation, land use in particular would probably have a public hearing. So, but the town council could set by ordinance when ordinances need a
Okay.
public hearing.
So they could just decide.
Yeah, and so I added the or ordinance to
Okay.
clarify that and add that in there.
Okay.
That was my question.
So shouldn't there be public comment required for ordinances? Wouldn't we want to have that? I mean, I'm assuming that any ordinance that gets discussed would be noticed in an agenda, and I would assume that if you're talking about it, you would want to allow public comment.
Yeah, I think that's set by the board, the board. Currently, they set their policy procedures for the public meetings. And the council, any council in the future would do that as well. I don't think it needs to be in the charter myself, but.
I think it just gives power to the people to make sure they got public comment. Why wouldn't you put it in there?
Is that implied in public hearing, though?
But again, they don't have to be public hearing.
I think he's saying if an
Oh,
ordinance
if there
comes
were
along that
not
doesn't
public
require.
hearings.
Tons of ordinances that come
Okay.
through on consent agenda, and I know we offer public comment on consent agenda.
Yes.
But that's, I mean, public comment should be made available to.
Where would you put it in?
Could
On
be
on A?
somewhere in there.
Special meeting and read by title
And read by title
and
with
given,
public
Put it
comment.
in B. If required by law or ordinance, the council shall conduct a public hearing with public comment on the ordinance.
yeah.
But that's only for public hearings, right? Because you want
Should-
public comment on all ordinances.
Council and read by title.
So how about how about us add another section that just says the town council shall
Yeah,
provide-
we're gonna have to tweak it. I don't know if it fits right in there the way it's worded now. But
I mean, that has been the practice of every board that I've sat on, was to allow public comment at the consent agenda and then allow public comment at each ordinance, but I see your point. I
I
mean,
see your
some.
point too, because you could have a
some-
board that says, no, we don't want to have public comment on this.
Yeah, that's not gonna probably go very far, is my guess, you know?
But
I mean, I don't represent an entity that doesn't have public
Mm-hmm.
comment. Some have two, top and bottom of the meeting.
Louisville does clarify, Severance didn't have it, but Louisville does have it, says,
Does it say?
no ordinance shall be adopted without first hearing one public hearing. The procedure of the
They all have
hearing,
public hearings.
specify, where does public comment?
How about
Does-
no ordinance shall be approved without an opportunity for public comment?
The language in Louisville, and you might also have the chart in front of me, they say, provide at least one opportunity for public comments on the ordinance prior to the initial council discussion on the ordinance.
I'm good with stuff like that.
Something like that.
So that's Louisville, you said?
Yeah,
Section 410.
yeah, 410-2.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions, comments?
In D, I didn't really understand the last sentence there and how that affects the rest of the wording in that section. It sounds to me like anybody on the council can, if they request an additional reading, does that mean they're essentially postponing a vote on that ordinance to the next meeting? Because they want to go over it again? Is that what D means?
Well, I think, so, okay. So you can request an additional reading of the ordinance at the next meeting, right? And then once that's exercised, no one else can exercise.
Yeah.
And I think Severance wanted the opportunity for the entire board to say, you know, we all want to continue it, that just because, you know, they can still do that if they want. They wanted that out. If the entire, if a majority of the board is saying, let's continue this, it could be continued again. I think that's what they were trying
Oh, I
to
see
get
what
at,
you're saying.
if I'm remembering correctly.
So if the whole board says, let's request another reading, they can do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, if there was something, let's say, really controversial and they wanted more discussion and they weren't ready, they still had the opportunity to do that.
I see. Okay. And requesting another reading just means we're going to put this off to the next meeting. We're not making a decision today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boy, a lot of people are going to hear about this one. We should give them a chance to come down next week and talk.
Yeah.
Any other questions in this section?
So we, if I can, so we did talk about this 10 days last time.
Yeah.
So, and I just noted in the side, Severance has 30.
Yep.
But one thing that Erie did that I think is kind of creative is it's kind of the best of both worlds. It allows an ordinance to become effective within 10 days, but it expands the referendum period
I was going to ask about that.
for the public to actually,
Yeah.
you know, challenge an ordinance. And it has provisions, and we can talk about that when we get down the referendum section, about, you know, what happens when that happens. And so it's a nice combination if you like it. I liked it, but.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, that's all right with me. Anyone? Okay. Any additional thoughts, questions, emergency ordinances?
If no one else, I had a question about public records at 6.07.
Oh yeah, this was, I know we're thinking public records came up a couple of times, so we're just going to have like one item kind of at the start, just addressing public comments, because there's a couple of times public records comes up in different sections. We just thought, just keep the language succinct and just have it kind of once.
And it can be included in the preamble, correct? Or no?
Absolutely, if you want to include it in the preamble. I didn't move it because
Okay, that's why I was asking.
I was
fair.
having trouble finding a great place for it.
No, okay,
I didn't think that this was the place. It kind of breaks up the
yeah.
ordinance provisions, so it needs a better home than this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Guiding principles section.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll just create a new article.
Well, we do have the miscellaneous provisions too.
Yeah, that's true. It could go in there,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Okay, I had one quick thought about emergency ordinances, 6.4 and the subsection 3. It says approval of an emergency ordinance requires 2/3 affirmative vote by the town council then in office. I'm just imagining some terrible catastrophic emergency where you're not able to reach 2/3 of people on the town council then in office. Is that a concern? Should it be people who are reachable, people who are present,
Available to vote.
available to vote? If, in case people are on some remote place that they can't be reached or without internet connection, or I don't know. No?
He's shaking his head, so I think.
What do you think?
Heather's shaking your head.
I don't know.
I like the way it reads because I think we're going to have to find them, search them. We're going to have 2/3 of the council.
Dumb question. What does then in office mean?
Like everyone who's on the town council at that time,
Whether they're present or not.
whether they're
Yeah.
present or not.
So they're sitting on the council.
Yeah, so they're either elected or appointed.
Yes.
They're actually in a seat, yeah.
I mean,
So if you set a quorum,
if all the electricity's out and,
quorum present, it would just be who you could get in the room or on Zoom
Yeah.
to make the decision.
And you're saying, Claire, cell phones are out.
I'm thinking if
Can't
it's
walk to-
just
yeah.
if people were out of town, like a lot of people were out of town during the fire and then maybe communication was cut off or, I don't
And,
know.
but
So
remember,
there's
this is,
emergency powers
Yeah.
and there's emergency ordinances.
Okay.
Emergency ordinance is actually creating a new law which has lots of
So it's-
connotation as opposed to things they've gone
exercising.
through where you have emergency
Like there's a flood.
requirements,
Yeah,
right?
you need
I
some
mean, that's where,
action, yeah.
you know,
Okay.
Matt can take action at that point in time.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
So
So this is.
it might not
this
be
is-
as serious.
Okay,
as-
this
yeah,
isn't like
Yeah.
the heat of the emergency.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good point, though.
I mean, I don't know how often Superior passes an emergency ordinance, but I'm guessing it's almost never.
We've had some emergencies.
Yeah.
I had 2 emergency
Yeah.
declarations on my watch.
You're wrong.
That's enough, yeah.
All right.
They are supposed to be used very rarely. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Article 6? All right.
I did notice another, a different charter included some lines under 6.8 that said, "No fine or sentence for such violation shall exceed the maximum established by the Colorado Revised Statutes for municipal ordinance violations." Wanted to ask if that's something we want to add in there. Just put some limits on what types of penalties or fines can be. No, don't do it?
Yeah, I wouldn't restrict, you know.
I'd leave it as is.
Okay.
All right.
I see your point. I see your point, right? So there's always the checks and balances, yeah.
All right. Article 7, municipal court.
So, does it matter how the municipal judge is appointed? I know it doesn't say by ordinance, by motion, by, or just not really matter.
I think it's up in the earlier section with the actual appointment provisions for the municipal judge. I want to say 4.
Oh, okay. we have-
So, yeah, it's not here.
Okay.
We
so
can
it's-
revisit that if you want to, but it's a
Yeah, I'm
majority, I
fine.
think, appointed by a majority.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think it's above, all right.
This is more function, court function.
All right, gotcha.
Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts? Municipal court? All right. Town finances and borrowing, Article 8.
Yeah.
Questions, thoughts, Article 8?
So, yeah. Sorry. No, this is one that comes up, and I think I kind of alluded to it. I mean, there's always a question of reserves that we have. And, you know, we went through this a long time ago, and when we even had less sales tax revenue than we have now, and we were pretty heavily dependent on Costco and Target, and I think we still are in that scenario. And I know we increased the reserves that we kept in most of the fund balances when I was on the board, and I know that got scaled back some. But is there a benefit of saying, hey, as long as one income source or one revenue source exceeds a certain percentage, that you actually have to at least be able to account for that in your reserves. I.e., if all of a sudden, Costco, something happened, we didn't have that revenue going on there, then you're gonna need to make sure you have enough reserves to cover your balance for a year or something along those lines. I'm not sure exactly how you're doing, it's probably a bigger discussion, but it just feels like you wanna be able to protect yourselves along those lines as a board, because it's really easy to start shaving and shaving and shaving, then all of a sudden you come back and you say, oh, we don't have money for this, and so, oh, wow, it's a big shortfall. And it's really kind of protecting, you can say it's tying the hands of the board, or you can say it's kind of protecting the town from being able to actually execute on those health and safety functions that they need to put in there.
Matt, is there a financial practice of the town where we have like a 6-month operating reserve?
Yeah, so each fund has a reserve policy that's set by the board each year. They look at that when they go through and create next year's budget. They look at those reserve policies and determine what's a good level. They usually don't change them much because they're pretty conservative and our staff's conservative, so we keep the policies at a higher reserve limit. Usually it's, some of the funds are 75 to 100% of annual year expenses, so.
Right.
So I think it works out well with the flexibility that the board has, considering each circumstance for that year to be able to set those reserve levels depending on what's needed. And the Marshall Fire is a prime example of that.
Yeah. And we've set those and we've changed them back and
Right.
forth. I think we were
Yeah.
125%. We even went to, I think, 175 on one of them for a while. And I think the point is to not let it drop below a certain level. I think I agree completely. I think with Paul, and I don't know who the finance director is today, but we were very much keeping far beyond what would happen from any single user being lost. But given that we're always going to be a town that's reliant on a couple big users or a couple big revenue sources, does it make sense to make sure we're just sort of contemplating what those reserves are?
The other challenge is trying to set one standard for all the different funds, because some funds don't need as much reserve.
Right.
Like the open space fund doesn't need the type of reserve limit that like the general fund does. So that's the other challenge with finding one set limit.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure the mechanism of it, but I just, I feel, again, in the spirit of this charter, in my mind, actually protecting the citizens of the town going forward and trying to cover how we have there, then I just kind of sort of think about what kind of things can we do with respect to reserves and the funds and/or funds going negative is probably the next question I'll have, right? How long can a fund go negative for, or, if we have to, before it actually becomes whole again, kind of in the balanced budget philosophy.
So you're saying that we should put in the charter that there should be a minimum amount of coverage in the reserve. Is that what you're saying?
Something along those lines, yeah.
So what happens if there's like a massive recession and we can't do that? What happens?
Well, that's where, like with any budget, you have to start cutting what your expenditures are.
Yeah, so I agree, but again, so what happens if you just can't meet that and you're trying to cut everything? You can't cut everything, but, could that happen, and what do you do?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think it necessarily causes a cause of action for someone to sue the town, but it definitely the citizens can say, you're not doing this. I get concerned when you get really specific language in there that it has unintended consequences.
Right.
I've seen communities struggle with language that probably with its intent was good, but after years, it just doesn't work under certain circumstances, and
Yeah.
they find themselves, and then they can't get rid of it from the charter.
That's right, yeah. So that was,
Charter amendment elections are difficult. I think I said that in my presentation, that they are very difficult, so.
And I started looking at the budget, and this is where I got to talk to Matt later on about budget. I'm not sure that we're sitting at a point where if one single user went out, that we wouldn't have the revenues, because the revenues are a lot more diverse than they were 20 years ago when I was on the board. So maybe it's not an issue right now, but I just go back to those days when it was Costco, Target, and that was kind of it.
that's right, yeah.
And I would, something to think about always, whether it's budget or something else, is that, if the elected officials aren't doing their job, like the citizens have rights. And But they do, and they have the ability to come and complain or recall or that kind of stuff. So, there's abilities there. So it's not a closed door.
And to Chris's point, if there's some kind of extreme circumstance, a massive recession that nobody can forecast, I would not want to hamstring or handcuff the future town council on being able to make those financial decisions in that point in time, knowing that, well, we've got to keep a 40% reserve.
Yeah, I agree.
And the reserves are for those times.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
when they're supposed
Yes.
to be used.
Yes.
so.
But the other side, right? The other side is a town board comes in and spends a lot of the money, including the reserves on certain things. And when it comes down to, you got to get stuff done, it's, oh, we don't have enough money for that.
Kick them out.
I mean, this
That
is,
can be tamed.
so,
There's an annual budget review, so it couldn't go on for more than a year, right?
but it could. They're the board, right? They're the board for 2 to 4 years, right? I mean, these things can get bled depending on what they're doing on there. I mean, it goes back to, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of funding. And if you guys are all fine with that way, I'm just sort of saying, how do you
Yeah,
protect
just
the budgets on there?
I think you can't, I think that it's the job of the board, future councils and staff to protect, because I could foresee, major recession, major disaster. You've got money here, you've got money that's required to be in the reserves, and they got to shut the water off. I mean, what do you think the citizens are going to want more, oh, sorry, we can't touch this money, it's in a reserve. It can't go below, got to shut the water off.
It undermines
so-
the point of the reserve.
Exactly, so, yeah.
I'll bring it up, and I don't want to really get into this policy, but the fact that people are saying we don't have enough money to repair the roads right now is a prime example of, we spent a lot of money, there was plenty of capital for repairing the roads, and other things were done for that. And some of the primary sources for what people want to go do, what we expect in the town, are not necessarily getting done from that perspective. So I'm just looking at saying, and that's not a blatant misuse of stuff per se, but you take that 2 or 3 years further down the road and all of a sudden it is a problem. And so if you guys want to leave it as, we want to make it as easy on the board as possible, I'm fine with that. It's fine because I'll get overvoted there, but I'm just sort of thinking about how do you actually look at this charter as doing both things, protecting the citizens as well as enabling the board.
I wouldn't say
agree
it's
with
easy
your-
on the board. I would say it's
Yeah.
providing flexibility for the types of circumstances that none of us can contemplate without handcuffing a future board.
Jeff, I agree with your philosophy on
Accountability.
on creating the charter. It's not only just to make things easy for future boards, but I disagree with your thoughts on, stating something in here about how we have to have a certain amount of reserves. I don't think that would work.
So you're against like balanced budget amendments and things like that in general?
Oh,
And that's effectively, this is very similar to effectively saying you're leveling some sort of balanced budget on those things.
Does it say anything in
No, it
here
doesn't,
about
but it's a
balanced budgets
conversation.
or what does it say currently about that?
It doesn't say anything.
Doesn't
doesn't
say
say
anything. We don't have to have a balanced budget. Is it, is a balanced
do.
budget the
You
same
do,
We do.
under the
do.
local government budget law. I
Yeah.
believe you
thing?
do,
Okay,
yes.
but that's a separate issue than how much has to be held in reserve.
It is, but I'm saying that's the scenario of looking at reserves. But anyways, I'll move on because no one wants to do that, right? That's fine. I thought I'd bring it up because it is a concern.
Discussion points, yeah. That's why we have these conversations.
We did have 8.07 flagged, just to revisit.
In 8.082, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, the Open Space and Trails Fund.
Are there any other funds tied to sales like that?
Well, we talked about
Directly tied to
Is this
sales?
CIP and Marshall Fire
Okay.
Fund, those two.
Is this
So we talked about
something-
removing it just
Correct.
because, just so as not to, because we can't name all
Yeah.
Funds.
the funds and the future funds and so on, so just remove it.
And ours comes from a sales tax, not a property tax.
That's correct.
And ours is-
And that's something that, does that come up for a vote regularly, or is that, yeah?
The,
Or will it not come up for a vote unless someone decides to?
Never will.
Yeah.
We did good.
It's already been voter approved, so unless there's a request or something to increase what's already been approved, it wouldn't come back to the voters.
It won't come back
Or
for a vote
repeal
unless
it.
someone,
Or
Repeal it,
yeah.
potentially.
Okay, repeat,
So
right.
the-
So most open space funds in Boulder County have had sunsets, but
Yeah.
we didn't put a
did
sunset
not
clause
do
in
that,
there, so
no.
it
Yeah.
goes.
I did talk to someone in Erie, they said their property tax for open space comes up every 5 years.
'cause
So, interesting.
Yeah, and I think the county has a similar tax.
Yeah, that was it.
And they could have done that in the question, original question.
Yeah, that's probably what they did. So,
Okay, so remove?
So,
Remove.
Okay,
yeah. Yep.
okay.
Okay.
quick question. So in 8053, so what happens today if a budget isn't approved? This says you go month to month with whatever's there.
8053.
Sorry. What happens now?
Yeah, what's the requirement if the town doesn't approve a budget?
You're automatically budgeted at 90% of your previous budget from the previous year, the last one you did.
Okay. And so this just says you go month to month with whatever the budget can be then? So you're basically saying if you don't approve it, then you've approved it? Because you can just go month to month if no one approves it?
Well, that's, I mean, state
No,
law
that doesn't say
doesn't,
this.
state
This
law
doesn't say
doesn't
90%.
go month to month, but it essentially does the same thing.
At a 90%
Yeah.
level? But this is basically saying you have 100%.
It does not have the 90 in there, you're right.
I don't know. Okay, you guys are all happy, it seems. Shame on you, but keep moving.
Yeah, I guess I'm not quite clear what you're
Your
Yeah,
mic.
would you?
Mike.
Sorry about that. Mike. Sorry, I guess I'm not quite clear what your question is. Are you suggesting that we add language in here that says that the town council is required to pass a balanced budget?
Well, balance is not the word. The town council is required to adopt a budget, but if they fail to adopt a budget, then they just keep going on a month-to-month basis, nothing stops. It just seems like
There's no penalty.
there's no penalty, there's no incentive, there's nothing to say, get this done and approved. So at least at the 90% level, you're driving something that says, hey,
We didn't talk about this, a penalty at all last time. So propose something. What do you
Well, I
want?
mean, if that's the state statute, then hey, either put it in there or say you must follow state statute for budgeting or something along those lines. It just feels like this is,
If,
why even have it? You have to approve it because there's no driver to have it, you know?
so it's just it's the process and this is the fail-safe and you don't have to like that fail-safe. You can, if you want to just rely on state law, you just remove it, take 3 out completely, and that's what will happen.
I just really take it out and let it follow the state statute, which if you say is 90%, or put in there that it can operate on a month-to-month basis at a,
What would,
Call it
why would
75,
anyone want to do that? What would be the incentive to not pass a budget?
Because people can't agree on the
And to go
budget.
month to month? So someone could just be really stubborn and keep everybody from passing a budget.
well, it's not one person, because again, it's 3 or 4.
Yeah.
It's a split
So-
board scenario.
But I think that's where the citizens and perhaps other board members would come and say, look, this is what we're elected to do, is adopt budgets and get work done. And if work's not getting done, there's a process for that. I'm fine leaving this in there. I can see maybe there's some emergency scenario, maybe some disaster, and you can't get it done, and you need to keep going on a month-to-month basis. This 90% penalty, it just seems arbitrary, and the whole point of the charter to me is to give the town greater control, and I don't know that we need to build in penalties for the potential future irresponsibility of, people to adopt a budget.
But you are trying to hold them responsible, right? So anyways, I'll let other people talk about it. You know my opinion on this. It's just-
Any other additional questions, thoughts, maintaining this?
I think, didn't we discuss this last time? We
think
talked about this a lot.
briefly, maybe?
I thought we did a lot on this.
I
Whether
don't
we should
recall a
leave these
lot.
dates in.
I don't recall.
Well, we talked about the dates a lot, but yeah, I don't know how much we talked about
Not about
this specific.
fail-safes.
Yeah, I think I want to go back and review that,
Yeah.
watch that discussion again. Because I thought we decided just to leave it as it is.
Maybe, you might be right. Sorry, I just don't
No,
remember.
that's okay. I want to go back and, because I don't have notes on my thing here, and I think if we're going to change that, I would have put
She
notes
might
in.
remember.
No, we didn't, we talked about dates, that's all I have.
Yeah.
is we talked about dates, but I don't think Jeff was here either. So to Ryan's point, he brought up a good conversation, so.
Yeah. Frankly, we didn't contemplate it, Joe.
No,
Exactly.
I don't think this
Exactly. So-
specific section was really debated.
But what kind of penalty would there be? Like, what are you suggesting?
Well, I
if
think
they
the
don't-
state statute says you can operate, you continue doing the same thing, but you're at a slightly reduced budget. It's a 10%
Okay,
reduced
so it
budget
just
level.
motivates people to pass something
Right,
a
right.
little more.
It's just,
So if we strike it, it goes to 90% as the default penalty.
it's not a 90% penalty, it's a 10% penalty,
10%
right? So
But
it sends the right message.
but it's not explicitly
That would hurt.
called out.
That might
means you have to
hurt
dig up the state statute to figure that
residents.
out.
If the budget gets cut by 10%, that could potentially hurt residents. In the meantime, while there's a situation where the board can't get along and isn't figuring things out, then the residents might suffer if they have to, if everything needs to be cut 10% or something has to be cut 10%.
Yeah. But to the point of,
Yeah.
the residents don't care about getting anything done unless it starts to hurt them a little bit. So this is how they do it, exactly what, let's say, like, this is how you get them to complain back to the board about something.
Do you think that wouldn't the fact that they just didn't pass a budget kind of upset them to start with? I mean, forget about the
Yeah.
10%.
I don't think they know.
No, I think because there's enough vocal residents in this town that would say, wait, how come there's no budget? And I think that, now I think this town is smart enough. I mean, they'd be on top of that. And there'd be recalls, or there'd be, the next election, people would be voted out, so.
And I don't know what Superior's experience with this is, but I can tell you the only 2 times I've seen this happen is in a very, very small community where they kind of just like accidentally missed it. It's only 65 people and they figured it out and got it sorted. And the other time was when a local government totally imploded. And so passing a budget was like the least of their problems, and they're still not back reconstituted. And now the county assessor or the treasurer just keeps all their money. So they're not even getting it.
Yeah, that's
There's a
so-
state statute that allows the county to retain your mill.
That's a bigger deal. I mean, to me, that would fall on the town manager and his staff. If they say, oh, we just forgot to pass it, then I'd say, well, that's the responsibility of the town manager.
Well, in fairness to them, they don't have one. They only have 65 residents.
Our staff is 65 people. The whole town is 65 people. Come on.
And they got on it right away. It was just it was an oopsie. But yeah.
I think
So-
getting back to this idea of checks and balances, though, if the town council did not pass a budget, and, typically that's done in December, we could have snow and the roads aren't plowed or the sidewalks aren't plowed. The town manager and staff will hear about it, and the town council will hear about it.
Yeah, so in my time here, we've never even come close to not adopting a budget, and it's usually done in October.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
It's been a great.
All are very organized budgetarily. So.
So with the previous 2 town managers before you, there was never a missed or even close to being missed?
Not even close.
Yeah,
It's just
We also haven't had a fire in 100 years either. So, I mean,
Yeah.
stuff happens, right? I'm just saying. Anyways, I asked what the state does because this goes back to how are we governed today? What changes are we trying to make? And just another example of this is something that's different than what we've been doing already. And if it's worked fine before, are we just changing things willy-nilly, changing things just because we think we're better than that? Whatever. So.
Well, maybe if they can't decide on a town budget in this hypothetical scenario, maybe there's a good reason for it and a discussion that needs to continue in that period of time when they are working through whatever issues there are, then, at least they've got something to fall back on, a budget that is still working.
Which they do either way, with 90% or 100%. It's just, with 100%, there's a lot less motivation because you're still operating as you were before. So, all right, I'll move on.
Okay. Any other questions? Scrolling down.
I wanted to look at 8.11.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
As I think you noted too, Catherine, is omit, basically because Jeff said that 8111 hinders the town manager's ability to work. So I would suggest omitting the whole 8.11 all.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
And that was Jeff, the finance director, not Jeff.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
The
Yes,
commissioner.
staff.
It took a second to.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm all right with eliminating 8.11. Any other?
Let me see what it says again here.
And 1, 2,
Yeah,
8.12.
The whole.
yeah, the whole highlighted
Yes.
section, yeah. Any other kind of thoughts on those?
So my comment on this section, I'm just trying to read through again, to remember it here, was this seems to force more transparency. You make it an agenda item at a minimum. If the time of the trans fiscal year appears probable, the town manager or the designee that the funds available plus anticipated revenues, others, any funds will be insufficient to meet the amount of the town manager shall provide a report to town council without delay recommending steps that be taken to correct the deficiency. The town council shall then take such further action as it deems necessary to correct the deficiency. So why do you want to get rid of this?
So.
A shortfall, you're asking the town manager to report to the board to take action to figure out whether we transfer something from another fund or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think the concern is that the town manager have that ability to make those transfers in that moment without coming to the town council, which is my understanding of what you do now, and allowing that to occur. And then, the board the town council is going to eventually have to come and do a budget amendment and fix all of that and sort it out, because it's going to be a fund-to-fund issue, right? And so it's not like the town council's totally out of the picture, the public's totally, but it allows that flexibility for the town manager to manage those things if that's occurring. I think two is the bigger concern. One isn't really any different than state law. I mean, ultimately, the town council would have to modify appropriations, amend the budget. So again, I think both of them, Finance Jeff was very concerned about the flexibility, and Martin weighed in on that too. So.
What is the standard procedure now if something like that had to happen and funds needed to be transferred? Is that something that happens? It just happens, or what does the communication look like with the town council?
Typically, it comes up when the board approves a project. It's in the budget section of that cover memo, information to the board. And then at the end of the year, we have to do budget amendments that the board has to approve.
So the board is involved in these kinds of transactions, yeah.
So, but that says that you could be moving money into funds in March, but it wouldn't be a budget amendment until before you close out the budget by the end of the year.
Yeah, typically it's
So it could be
November.
9 months or more before it actually
But
comes out.
also if the item is approved by the board, it's described in the budget section of the cover memo as well,
How it will affect the budget.
where the funds are coming from.
Yeah.
For that item or project.
Okay. All right.
I know some of the rationale in here was just concerns about restrictions, again, kind of hampering like town staff and the town manager's responsibilities going forward and the finance director, yeah.
I get the trend here. I get the trend here from across
It
this.
sounds like a report really is being made if this
Well, I don't think
scenario
it's,
comes up.
well, yeah. I mean, the way the report it's under an item of X. So if you don't really care about X, you're not necessarily contemplating that, oh, well, X is actually impacting this fund over here because that's where the money's coming from for now because we're moving it from here to here. But I didn't really care about, whatever the main topic was, but the fact that the money actually is coming from something else you wouldn't know about.
Or would you say, if we're going to do this project, we're going to take money and it's going to affect this?
So a good example is Wildflower Park. We borrowed from the water fund to fund that project, and then the water fund was reimbursed from the general fund over a 5-year period with interest.
Yeah.
So that was described
Yeah.
to the board during.
They would be made aware of
Right.
where funds are coming from.
But if you didn't care about Wildflower Park, but you were really concerned with the water fund, you wouldn't have known that happened necessarily because you wouldn't have been looking per se. There wouldn't have been something that said, hey, these funds are there's a memo here, there's a fund that's being moved
Oh,
around.
I thought you just said that you would.
There is
It's
a
in-
If you were looking at the
Yeah.
Wildflower Park
Right.
proposal.
Yeah.
But the funds often come from something else. So if they're going to take money from open space to go do something else, if you only care about open space and you don't see, there's nothing on the agenda that says, oh, the open space fund is being affected here.
It is spelled out.
No, well, I mean, okay, so I think we're talking about what's in the packet, in the memo, and what's like on the agenda, like, movement of money
title-
from
the
open
title for
space,
the
that kind of thing.
project,
And I don't know that provision gets you to where you want to go, because I don't think it's that specific. It could still be described as Wildflower Park and meet that requirement.
Okay, so you may be right there, right? Because all it says is, oh, there's a fund that's insufficient.
Yeah, and the memo might say that, but the agenda might say Wildflower Park.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it just seems like if money's moving from Fund A to Fund B, that somehow it should be noticed, whether it's, don't want to hamper this so you can't do it, but it should be noticed within a, I don't know, 30 to 60 days, so that people are aware that this has occurred. Or better yet, if you can be aware that it's occurring beforehand, so at least that someone can adjust it call it a consent agenda item or whatever else. So at least it's noticed so that people know that it's happening.
Wouldn't the town council have to approve that kind of, if it's on the agenda?
It's not about town council, it's about the
You're
public
worried
at
about the
large.
public
It's about the
knowing.
public at large knowing what's going on.
Yeah,
It's
they'd have to
transparency.
dig into it a little bit to figure that out, yeah, if they were interested.
I mean,
yeah.
most people I know who look and stuff, if they look at the agenda and they say, all right, I don't care about most of these things, or what's on the consent agenda, all right, that's interesting. Or, I don't like this, I'm coming down, I'm gonna talk about it, right? So you wanna make sure it's clear that something's being A to B, so when they take that one.
And I will say, I don't know if the charter is really, that's what a
it's
charter is for.
Public transparency.
To get that specific and in the weeds about exactly what's on an agenda or how it's worded and how to engage the public, they're gonna have to engage to some extent. And charters are meant to be guiding documents with not the kind of
Right.
specificity that I think you're
Well,
suggesting.
notification, increases or reductions of appropriation is it's there for a reason, it's there in other charters.
That is very rare. That is a rare. I'm just telling
I'm just
you.
saying, you guys are drawing from saying this charter is similar, I'm just saying, it's in
But
some
Jeff,
charters, so we can have a conversation about it.
To your point earlier,
You
like,
can say it's rare, or it's
when we go
not
pitch
rare.
this to the town, and this is different, this will be different, if I understand, from how we operate today. When we go back to pitch and say, to your point, oh, we changed these things,
Yes.
this would be a change that we'd have to explain, right?
Well, we don't currently have a charter, so we're not
No,
really
no, no.
changing.
The mechanisms, the process right now would change with this inclusion.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, so deleting it
Residents-
would make it more consistent with the
Yeah.
way we're doing it right now.
Yes, but adding control, adding transparency is deemed as good. Taking away things is deemed as bad.
Well, I don't know if, to
That's fine.
your point, just like making sure agenda items are detailing every single specific item. I don't know if this even gets to that point, or we can even possibly get that granular in a charter like this.
That would be what a board member or board members would say, that we want to have this built in moving forward with this board. So we want to be able to explain where money's coming from for certain things.
So the granularity goes back to the topic title. And again, you guys are set in one way, I'll move on, that's fine. But the granularity, I'll just simplify it, goes back to the increase or reduction of appropriations being noticed, and that's what this is about. So if you're changing on the funds, then it's about it being addressed. And so this particular mechanism was by a report. I don't really care what the mechanism is, but it should be done within a certain time frame or before something happens, so that people are aware that you're moving money around that way. I understand Catherine's point about, oh, well, we put it here, we put it there. Yeah, you're right. You can bury it everywhere, and that's maybe what's happened.
Not my words.
Well, okay.
No, my words are, that doesn't get you to what you wanted.
To
That was
public notice, that
Yeah.
doesn't say anything about public notice.
Well, it does say that there has to be a report
The
generated.
town council.
It says there's a report generated. You could argue that report's, in a Wildflower Park packet, but.
I still don't know if this section specifically
Go
gets
ahead.
to.
You can
the
delete it,
crux.
that's fine.
Consensus to
Okay.
remove? Okay.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
The next item I believe that was highlighted was 8.14.
Okay, actually, I did one on 813.
Okay.
Apologize, right. So it talks about an independent audit. Independent audit can be triggered by the board, by the town council. So is there any other mechanism that can drive an audit? Can it be done by referendum or other way?
No, Not unless you initiated an ordinance that somehow gave citizens power or required audits more often, maybe. I'm thinking of creative solutions. I've never seen anything like that. But yeah.
Okay.
That answer.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the mechanism, it's just a little bit of a cat that has independent audit that's initiated by the board, by an auditor that's approved by the board. It's just,
I mean, you're correct on that, but the auditor has,
fiduciary duties.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it has the state regulations, so I get that, so, okay.
Yeah, so this was, I remember talking about like Tabor and the potential with the repeal on it, and just reading your notes. So if Tabor were repealed, you don't believe that this section would restrict the town?
That's correct. That's the conclusion. I also don't think Tabor will be repealed anytime soon, but if it, for some reason, I didn't think Gallagher would go either, but. Yeah, so this doesn't restrict the town because there's a different constitutional provision regarding borrowing that existed before Tabor.
Thanks for researching that.
So would your general kind of recommendation be just maintain this language as is?
Yeah, I think the second paragraph in particular preserves your right to issue bonds without voter approval, relying on the exception to that public indebtedness provision in the Colorado Constitution, and currently that exists in Tabor as well. So I think it's a positive and not a restriction, I guess, if that's how I would look at it, so.
I had no issues with this section. Any other kind of comments?
Down to where?
All right, 8.14. Yeah. Okay. The next one, 8.16. Visit for removal. Any additional questions or thoughts?
So you asked me to ask Erie about both of these. And this is actually an Eagle holdover and not an Erie holdover, apparently. And Eagle had a very strong finance person on their home rule charter, and they really wanted these in there. But apparently Erie just hardly talked about it at all. So they are unusual. So I think they can be removed without incident, but that's all the information I got, so.
Okay. Any thoughts?
I'm good to remove.
We can remove that.
Fine with removing.
Is this something that ever happens? Does the town ever borrow money short-term?
Jeff Stone said no on 8.16, and then 8.17, we have to follow the state statute anyway.
Okay.
What's the stipulation on special districts now? So is this different than what state statute has about districts on 818 or 8, whatever it is now?
Yeah, it gives you extra power, I would say. And it's that mill levy, that limiting the maximum mill levy, that it gives you the power to do that. You can negotiate that with a special district you create, but this gives you the real authority to do that. And I know a community that does this they have a lot of special districts, and they use this tool quite often. Particularly in metro districts and how those operate, where you have bond questions and mill levy questions passed when you have like one voter or two voters, and then people buy in and then realize they have these astronomical mill levies.
Okay, so this is the check side of it, okay. So what happens to existing districts if this gets approved then? So
This would only apply to,
newly formed districts? Okay.
you can't go back and
Change their.
change their service plans. Not unless you want to fight a very big lawsuit, I think.
Okay, to me, that's a good thing. This adds some protection for people who are buying houses, places where they have 50 mills.
All right. Article 9.
I'd like to ask the chair before we jump into Article 9, could we take a 5-minute break, please?
Sure.
If everyone else is okay with that?
Sure.
That's all right. Do I have a motion for a 5-minute recess? Motion.
I'll second it for you,
Foster.
okay?
Just recess if you'd like, yeah, you know.
5-minute recess. All right. Yep.
Stretches.
We can move on to Article 9 then. Any kind of questions, thoughts, comments on this?
We gotta go one section at a time, or how far are you going?
This was pretty straightforward in our last conversations. And there only looks like there was one change.
So then my only question on 904, is there any restrictions right now in terms of rates such that the utilities don't end up being a revenue source as opposed to covering costs for utilities?
Maybe I was gonna say the charter, no,
Oh, I know it's not in the charter.
Yeah, so you do it by rate
Is there-
study, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any state statutes or anything else that restricts the?
Not sure,
Not that I'm aware of.
yeah.
Yeah, and in practice, we'll do a rate study every 3 to 4 years.
Right.
Just not only for the end users, to make sure that it's a fair, reasonable cost to them, but also in development circles, to make sure that we're covering costs for system development fees that we charge to the developers.
Sure. Right, and I know we've done everything well. I'm looking again at the opposite side of, in the future, not as responsible as boards are in place, or these are the protections that say, hey, because you can easily, well, we have for-profit utilities called Excel and other things that certainly are for-profit that way, so. And there's a rate commission on them to some extent, so. Don't know whether any charter you've seen have put in there for utility rate control or not, or rates should be in line with,
Nope.
Everyone trusts everyone, then I'll move forward. Let everyone know.
All right.
Jeff, I'm not sure I'm completely tracking how you framed that. Can you just kind of briefly summarize, like?
Well, I mean, it's just basically the town council can by resolution establish rates, rules, regulations, the service provided for municipally owned utilities. So those rates could be anything. Doesn't, you know, like Matt said, today we do a rate study, we understand what the rates are gonna be needed and everything else like that. But it could also be in the future, you wanna supplement another fund by using utility rates, you could. There's nothing that stops utility rates from being there per se.
Following a public hearing.
You what?
Except it says following a public hearing.
Where's that?
Where's that?
Are we at
No,
903?
no.
904.
Oh, sorry.
And so District 1 is our water, sewer, and storm utility district. It's an enterprise fund, so the funds generated from that
Can't be elsewhere.
can't be used elsewhere. Yeah.
Any other additional questions?
So are there limits on enterprise? I know there's been other changes on state law for enterprise funds. What are some of the enterprise fund limitations then? That, in terms of revenue generation, or it just has to be held within that one enterprise fund?
I don't know that there's any limitations on revenue generation, but there's limitations on use of that revenue. So it kind of keeps it on the back end.
All right.
I mean, if you build a huge enterprise fund because you charge $1 million a month for water or whatever, you're gonna, where does that get you?
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I think the point is it's an enterprise fund, so it can't be transferred elsewhere. So.
yeah.
I'll ask it. That's fine.
All right. So if nothing else, we can move on to Article 10, first reading taxation. Any?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just 10.01, can we eliminate 1 and 2 and just use the language like severance has? I think it's
That was
seven.
actually my exact comment.
Or Eagle.
What do they say?
Severances, specific language, or do you have it right in front of you?
Yeah, it says the town shall have all powers of taxation available to municipalities in the Colorado Constitution or any other enabling law.
Copy for Eagle as well.
Yeah.
So we would not need any voter approval for any of those listed scenarios, is that what you're saying?
No, you would.
You-
It's just streamlining this, but you still would, you would need it because that's per Colorado Constitution.
What's listed there is in the Colorado Constitution?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And
The
honestly,
first one is, that's taper.
Yeah, the power to tax.
Oh, okay.
And just one of the questions I had, and I actually was asking Matt about this, and this has to do with, I think it's subsection 1, any new tax rate increase, mill levy above that of the prior year, valuation for assessment ratio increase, all that. Right now, the town, I'm not sure if it's been done in the last few years, but when we were on the board, we reduced our portion of the property taxes each year.
You gave
I
a
don't think a
temporary
lot of-
tacc credit, or you just reduced it? Yeah.
We reduced the
Yep,
effective
okay.
mill levy, but we didn't reduce the mill levy.
So
But that's not the case anymore.
yeah, the question I had is if we were doing that, and I guess just to keep the math simple. So I understand that in order to, you have to do it at the budget time when you reduce that. So let's just say that we wanted to reduce it 10%. We approve it. The next year, we go in and we see that we need to increase it back. That would require us then to go to the voters, correct?
That's my
to increase
question
it?
too. If you get rid of because it says mill levy above that of the prior year. So it would be
Right.
above the prior year.
That's right. So in that case, we'd have to go to the voters and have them approve that increase, or is it back if you stay below what the original amount approved by the voters? But that doesn't say that in here.
I'm pretty sure the way we've done it as a temporary credit, so the mill levy that we're entitled to is still that 12.86. It hasn't changed for, what has been now, almost 20 years, right? And the way it's worded in the ordinance is we're reducing what we're actually charging people, but it doesn't actually change what the mill levy is.
So maybe that's the case the way we've been doing it, but in number 1 here, subsection 1, that's not how I read that. But regardless, if we were to go to what Severance does or what Eagle has, and we eliminate that, then that,
So that is in Tabor. That mill levy from the prior, above the prior year is in Tabor. So
Okay.
you should know that. So that provision has not been interpreted by courts in Colorado. But the theory is pretty much what you've been doing, is that the voters approved, let's say 10 mills, right?
Yeah.
At some point, it was voter approved at 10 mills, and you drop it to 8 for temporary tax credit.
and if we take it up to 9 the next year, we're still good.
Right, because you're not going above what
Above
the
that.
voter
Okay.
approved
Yeah, yeah,
mill levy
fair.
is. That's the theory. There's also 2 state laws, one recently passed, that now allows for that temporary tax credit or reduction in a mill to provide relief, property tax relief. That's the most recent statute. And there was also the Tabor statute, in case you go over, that you could drop down and go back up. So the legislature, I think, sees that as being an okay movement in your mill. And I think a court would say, yeah, as long as you're not going up to 11,
Gotcha.
you're
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
But it is untested, so just so you know.
Okay. But anyway, I would say that we should just change that section and
And that was Severance you read from, or?
Severance and I guess Eagle.
Eagle has it too.
So what is B trying to accomplish there?
I just asked for punctuation. That sentence is,
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's B trying to accomplish there?
understand.
So that's actually in state law as well. Yeah, and I don't know if it's worded quite like that in state law, but in state law, there's you can't enter into a multi-fiscal year obligation without adequate reserves or cash on hand to pay for that. So that's a pre-Tabor statute.
And that's in state law as well, you said?
So I kind of agree with Chris and Heather, just tightening this language. The power to tax in these other charters is just a single sentence. And if everything else is covered by state law, I think that's fine. And in Severance's charter, if you want to look it up, it's 10.01.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Any additional questions, comments on 02 and 03? Here.
Town should be authorized to collect. So the state statute restrictions for spending on new services is a requirement from a statutory town perspective, correct? That you have to go to vote if you want to provide new additional services.
I'm not sure.
No, what do you mean by new additional service?
Services that aren't traditionally part, like we want to do the rec center, and you had to get new funding, just do new spending on a recreation center, you had to go to the board, or had to go to the voters to approve expenditures on services that weren't traditionally part of a.
Would that be outside of the general fund, though, or?
Not necessarily. Like, for example, if a city had enough reserves to build a recreation center, the town council or city council could decide to build that and provide those services. If they wanted to pay for the operating costs out of the general fund or through fees from the recreation center.
I strongly remember the conversations we had early on about new services, specifically the rec center. I know
Yeah.
part of it was the taxation part, but part of it was also, it was not considered a part of what the statutory town services were.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
I can take a peek, and this is first run through, so I can take a peek and see if I can find something. I'm not aware of anything like that, but
Okay. Yeah, if we could, yeah, I'll dig into it a little further as well.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Because a lot of the conversations we had before were geared around that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
just the idea for everyone is, I mean, we could all of a sudden say, they could want to go do, I don't know, build
An ambulance service.
build a park force or whatever else like that, even if they just take regular funds, you're saying, all right, well, you're still taking funds from a balance. They're saying, really, we're going to spend something that, on whatever pet project, that has no bearing on what people have spent money before on, right? And that's what a lot of the services were saying, hey, you know what, these are tax dollars that were collected for, under the general fund for a specific set of purposes, right? And so now to take those and say, well, yeah, roads don't matter, we're gonna go do, I don't know what.
But are general fund dollars for general municipal uses and funds collected under, let's say, the open space taxes for a specific use, and so therefore you can't use the open space tax to go build a rec center without voter approval?
Yes, you're absolutely right on there. I think the issue goes, but this is where it went back to a statutory town. One of the limitations on statutory town versus a home rule town was statutory town had a set of services that were traditionally accepted as services by a statutory town. That was the conversation I remember having 20 plus years ago.
I think that usually came up because anything we were going to build or buy would generally require enough money to where we had to raise taxes. But the community center is an example where we did not, it was not in the budget, and it was not a tax, it was purchased with.
I don't want to get in that debate right
yeah.
now because I feel a little bit on the other side of it. I mean, community centers served us well through the fires and stuff, but I also recognize that we spent $10 plus million of capital funding that could have gone to roads and other things to go ahead and buy and renovate that community center. And you say, we don't have money for roads because we did something else. And that's an perfect example of what some of the concerns are. You can argue a community center is no different than a town hall, so it can, okay. But that's the protections that we're looking at for even crazy, the things that could be crazier.
Yep.
I'll take a peek, see if I can find it.
At least we didn't buy Lifetime.
That was on the table. I remember people talking about that.
Yes, we would have had a tax for that. We needed a tax for that.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah.
All right.
That came on.
So everyone ready to move on to Article 11?
I just want to say thank you to Catherine for making the notes about this is already in state law.
Those are my Jeff notes.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm looking for, right? Because
These are common questions is, do we like these? Do we want more?
Yeah.
So.
During my research, talking to folks, I actually asked about thresholds for each of these. And no surprise, they're wildly different depending on who you talk to. On the far end of this, someone said, I wish these weren't even things. I wish there was no opportunity for initiative, referendum, recall.
These actually have to be in your charter.
I'm not going to say. And some preferred very low thresholds, some preferred middle of the road, and some preferred high thresholds. I'll speak from experience on referendum. 5% is, I think, just about the right balance. I think the statutory law got that right. It's pretty difficult to get 5% in a town this size. Very difficult, actually. 10% would be burdensome, but I think less than 5% would be too low. There has to be some amount of work to be put in. I'll talk to my fellow commissioners. So I think across the board, initiative referendum probably should be at 5%. And then recall seems high to me, but I'm fine having that debate. So hopefully that gives a little perspective. I think it should be a high enough threshold to make it be a little bit of work on the people wanting to enact those, but not so much work that it's impossible.
Yeah, that's what, that's 500 people, right? I mean, isn't that, there's about
Around
10,000
like
registered
600.
voters?
I think it was like 600 something when I was
About
doing some
500.
research.
10% is 600 or 500?
No,
5%.
5% would be about 5, because I thought there was 10,000, about 10,000 registered voters.
8,000,
8,000,
No.
little less.
it's about 8,000. I don't know what it is now, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it would be
Yeah.
hard to get 400 or 500.
It's hard.
Yeah,
I think it should be hard. I think that's
it should be hard, but
What,
not-
referendum?
Not impossible.
Or
5%.
initiatives, I mean?
No.
5% seems reasonable. Is that
Yeah, I,
reasonable?
That's what I'm saying.
I think 5% is reasonable.
I'm advocating for 5%, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I do
agree.
too. I think going outside of those bounds, we'd need a very compelling reason, and that could be one of those red flags for people to, get strongly emotional about it one way or the other. So I'm good with keeping it 5%.
State.
Yeah, I'm
Agree.
fine with 5.
Quick,
And then,
we good? So quick question on 1101-2. So are there actually some things that are in conflict of this, or is this just sort of a placeholder for later on? 'Cause I didn't,
It's a great question, because I kind of had the same question, because it gets into a lot of detail below about the process. And I should have, but I didn't compare them very closely. I will do that for you. So I wasn't really sure if 2 had any purpose after they put all that stuff in there. So, but I can compare those really closely for you.
that's my question.
Yeah.
To simplify it all. for
Yeah.
everyone, 'cause-
Now you're,
Right, Jeff.
now you're coming around.
I think it was a bit more specific. It added a bit more meat to the process, some details, yeah.
and that would be specifically with 2.
Same thing with 1102-2 as well, same question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Town of Eagles is almost exactly the same, except they have 10%, so.
Yeah.
Smaller town, maybe.
Smaller town.
Yeah.
All right. Any other?
Oh, I just, on 1102 sub 3, I just have why next to this, and why is it that you can't? Hold on a second.
Why are they not subject to referendum?
Yeah.
Because it would cause total chaos. Like if your budget ordinance was subject to referendum, like you'd be stuck in
Oh.
that process.
Yeah.
A month.
Okay.
Or a special election, like we want to have a special election. Oh, we're gonna subject that to referendum, and you just be in a cycle,
Okay.
so.
All right.
They're kind of things that are, just the citizens don't get to weigh in on that list. It's not uncommon, that's a fairly common list of things, so.
Okay. Thank you.
On 1102-6,
Yeah.
that was your comment earlier about, because we said enact the ordinance within 10 days back in the previous section, but if the ordinance is subject to referendum, you
You
have
would
to.
have 10 days is the theory,
Which is
right?
basically impossible.
And, yeah. And so I like the balance that Erie struck. I know I try not to give you my opinion, but I really
No,
like
I do
this.
too. I was going to address it this session. but
Yeah, so it allows the town to act and not spend that 30 days in that period, but also preserves referendum for actually a longer period than is currently allowed under state law. So it's actually giving a longer
Yeah,
period of
yeah.
referendum.
Which yeah.
So I have to go back to Chris's referendum question then.
Okay.
If you finish that one.
No, Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm fine with like the 45 days.
Yeah.
So the only one is capital programs. What does that mean? Because most things are capital expenditures. Would anything fall under? So
It's a
the
great
town decides
question.
to take all of the road fund and build a Rex or a Lifetime Fitness, right? Does that mean?
I guess it could be that, yeah.
So
I
that's
don't know if
not-
you define that. You probably don't define that currently in your code. You certainly could in your ordinances. It's a budgetary term, yeah.
Could look it up.
That would be that would be one of those
Google
expenditures that you
capital.
would say that
Capital.
should come
Does
under
it have a
referendum if something's to
definition?
something
Yeah.
crazy like that. I mean, I get that
What
you
does
can't
that
just
mean?
take the budget as a whole and let that be subject
Right.
to referendum that way, but.
Just worth
I mean, there's the risk, as Catherine said, that nothing gets done.
Again, the bar isn't that low, 500 voters to to sign on to every one of these things. I don't think the bar is that low to get a referendum started.
What other actions could a citizen take if they had a strong opposition to a budget or one of these categories?
Well, we just saw it with Rock Creek Parkway. The board was marching down the road to have that a capital project to be one lane in each direction, and
Nobody
the
liked
residents
that.
came out
Yeah.
and said, and so now it's staying as a 4-lane
But
project.
had the board not gone that way, then there would be no recourse.
Right.
So had the board not listened, which, recall, what could have recalled?
That's why we have a recall?
But that's an even longer term thing because
Yeah.
you get the capital expenditure.
Jeff, I think we should probably flag that as a study for second read, for sure.
Just highlight-
This brings up a great point from that perspective. We need to look at a couple of those.
Highlight specifically.
Yeah, I get the point on, I guess, big and potentially controversial projects, but I mean, you've probably also got, very small and localized capital projects that might be a real thorn in someone's side, but it's more of a, very small localized issue. And do you want to have that opened up to?
That goes back to 500 voters, right? Getting 500 signatures, right?
Yeah.
It's not like anyone can come in
Yeah.
and do that, right? I mean, it takes.
It takes a lot of effort. It does.
So if the board had ignored all the people who were opposed that Rock Creek Parkway and passed that, would the people under this have been able to initiate a referendum about that, or no, since it's considered a capital program?
Sorry, I missed the first part.
I believe so.
No.
I don't think
They
have
would
recourse.
not, yeah, under this.
Under this, yeah.
That's something to consider then.
Under the current.
And
I don't think the trustees realize.
I will also say that the budgetary powers are, they're a mix of administrative and legislative powers, and there's an argument about referendum over administrative power.
Right.
So, that it's not available.
Right.
So if you approve a contract, it's not subject to referendum is the argument. So even if you do it by ordinance. So I don't know that even now,
Yeah.
forget this, you would be able to seek relief as a referendum. Does that make sense?
Because that's considered an administrative.
It could be, yeah, I think.
Well, if it's something that the board votes on, then wouldn't it be considered legislative?
No,
No?
the board does 3 things,
Oh.
quasi judicial, legislative, and administrative.
Okay.
So let's say I don't know if you have a contract. Let's say Matt's got an employment contract and they approve it by, it wouldn't probably be
So
by
that's
ordinance,
administrative.
but let's pretend like it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be typically those kind of things are administrative.
But ultimately, that would go to the courts at that point in time. If you were doing this, it would go to the courts. So there's an avenue. If it's prohibited, if it's explicitly prohibited, then you cannot go down that path. The charter explicitly prohibits it. If it were to be contested that way, it would either end up being a lawsuit one way or another, or it would be accepted as a referendum.
Right.
Right. So it's a different mechanism if you put it in here versus not.
And
We can take it up later, Ryan, to your point.
at Rock Creek Parkway, there's the other side. There's residents who wanted a 1-lane road in each direction, so they could do a referendum. So, I mean, you have, and then the road continues to deteriorate to a point where it's not.
Well, I mean, like even
Drivable.
Louisville did the red tail thing. Right?
Yeah.
They went to referendum on that.
Right, yeah.
So in Superior's budget, capital projects are defined as major non-reoccurring projects. Purchases of real property and selected equipment may be exempt from these limitations. So it's referring to something else. So.
Major, non-recurring, okay?
So Rock Creek Parkway would have been.
Yeah.
But that's a project, and the language in here is a capital program, and I think that's what.
Program versus project,
Sorry.
yeah.
So should we just change the language to project instead of program?
No, I don't want
I
it
think
in
we
there.
want,
Projects.
I think we
There's
want
one
it
in there at all,
programs.
but those words are,
So
I mean,
do we have a definition of a capital program that's different from a project?
No, that
Maybe we
was
should.
her first comment, yeah.
and there aren't statutory definitions for these terms. So it's kind of it's a budgetary
Yeah.
creation.
Matt,
It's
the
most-
Rock Creek Parkway is a good example. Did that come back to the board? Did they do that over 2 meetings?
They did.
They did it over several meetings, actually.
Okay.
It started with the work session and then board meetings after that.
Okay.
So, yeah, so we can revisit, I think that's one to look into. I mean, between the capital programs, appropriations, those are kind of the two things that you look at. The levies of taxes and special election salaries, terms of employment, that's probably all fine being done in the budget itself.
All right.
Good idea, Chris.
Okay. Any other additional questions, comments in this section? Anything related to the petition committee? Form and content of petitions?
I think a lot of this is standard. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
boilerplate.
The only thing I was a little confused about on the petition, I can't find the section the petition committee was on right now.
11.03.
The petition committee, when I looked it up on the state website, it says the petition committee is the person who pays the petitioner. So I was a little confused, this language versus,
Where did it say that?
it was in the Secretary of State.
They pay?
Funded the petition and they needed a license or something like that to go do the.
Oh, those may be rules at the state for initiatives.
Right, so I was just a little-
Yeah. Like, so this is very local government, right? Like, these provisions are gonna be very, the Secretary of State's gonna have zero role in
Okay, so
this.
this, okay.
Yeah.
So very different terminology then. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it could be possible that initiatives and referendums at the state, when they're available, are run a little bit differently. I'm just not familiar.
Yeah, I remember one case where they had someone who was collecting petitions who wasn't licensed or something like that, who was collecting
Yeah.
signatures. They hired people to go collect their signatures and related to that. I wasn't sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, would that be like for a Colorado state ballot change? That's probably
state-
different.
Yeah, then, and
Yeah.
I'm just not familiar with that
Right, but they use that
process.
same petition committee language, that's
Oh,
why.
okay.
Yeah.
Whereas this is basically saying whoever signs up to,
It's really so there's a contact for the town to be able to manage this process, because there's lots of back and forth right at the beginning.
just wanted to make sure that there was that difference. Thank you.
General comment about the entire section 11. I mean, the rest of the document thus far, we've really tried to craft as enabling language, and section 11 really reads like very specific instructions. And so it feels a little, a lot of detail in this particular section for how recalls and referendums are initiated, and wondering if it's worth having a conversation of basically copying this or putting this into the town ordinance or something that's not in the charter, but still keep the language, because I think there's a lot of really good stuff in here. But again, the rest of the charter so far, we've really tried to keep this focused on enabling tools, and this is very prescriptive.
Would it, and we already talked about this, but I was gonna take this and actually compare the state statutory processes, because, I mean, you can put it in an ordinance, but you wouldn't need to if it's really similar, and actually have that comparison with that, a help in kind of figuring out what's really different and what you can just pull out.
But
That would help for me.
Okay.
I interpret this a little differently, though. The stuff that we're talking about, enabling and flexibility and stuff, is for future boards, and this is for residents. And I think we have to spell it out more, what the residents are, able to do.
Right, yeah, I don't think the board should really be able to change this type of thing, because
Right.
this is kind of a check on the board,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this was language I've usually referenced like severance if I'm really looking for like brevity purposes. I think that's one of the shortest ones, charters that I've seen. And even severance, they have like almost this exact language,
Yeah.
like verbatim.
And I'm doing this from memory, it's been a really long time, but I think severance, and I've heard you guys say this too, that it would be easily accessible
Yeah.
to the voters to be able
Right.
to go to one place and read
Yeah.
it all, rather than,
Yeah.
trust me, it's not easy to find in state
It's
law.
not easy.
So-
It's not easy.
And I think this, like I said earlier, I think this is more robust. It kind of fills in the gaps perhaps, but I'll do that comparison for you.
This is the citizen empowerment piece, okay? This is.
That's why it's
fundamental to
required.
that. So, section, we had 1111. I'm gonna figure out where we are.
Yeah, any other?
The one last thing I
I
might
have
throw in
notes on
here
is
that
recall.
would differ
Yeah.
from state. I'm trying to, sorry, there's only one thing I might suggest that's different from the state.
In which section?
I'm trying to find it. I'm looking.
Is it before 1111?
It's 11:04.
Pressure's on.
It's about the town clerk has to review and return within 5 days.
Oh, the petition?
Oh,
The form and content?
11.04. 2, yeah.
So it's probably fine. You can get into a cycle where the town clerk doesn't necessarily give you the reasons for rejection. It says shall state the basis for rejection, but it can be in such vague terms that you spend cycles on this 5-day just trying to meet the 45-day limit.
Would the word specific before basis make you feel better?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other comments adding?
I had some
I like
a question on 1106.
So just real fast to
Okay.
Ryan's point, is that okay, adding that language?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay. Yeah,
So 1106, within 30 days after the petition is filed, town clerk shall complete a certificate as to its sufficiency and the validity of the signatures. So validity meaning what?
That the people that signed it are residents and registered electors. Yeah, or whatever the requirement is.
So I recall in that last thing that I heard somewhere that they were not checked.
Oh,
Mine,
Mine
I
were
had
checked.
to get people signed for this to get on this committee.
Right.
And I had some that were rejected. So,
Right.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to sign my own, so my name got rejected.
Right, and that's,
Yeah,
and that's
I got
what,
mine
that's what
rejected.
validity means.
Yep.
That's what validity means. What, Matt, you were going to say something.
So the town clerk, they'll go through, they'll get the electors from the county, the
Yeah.
people that have registered electors, and then they'll compare that with the signatures on the petition.
I'm pretty sure I remember a conversation with Kendra that did not happen on the life science referendum.
Well, I was in the office and I witnessed them
Okay.
going through and
Okay.
checking, so
All right, maybe I
can confirm that.
heard that wrong.
We did get a letter of completion, if I recall. Yeah, a mail copy of the certificate to the petition committee, but it happened after 30 days. Just, I don't know if that matters, but
That's when you need lawyers.
it did matter to me.
As a side note, Matt, as a town manager, I think someone needs to make it clear that if you're doing a petition, this goes for, or if you're doing any of these signatures, because I think all of us signed our own petitions for this commission. and we
I didn't.
know-
Yeah.
Oh. I did not know you could not sign your own.
Come on.
I signed mine too.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah, I got mine, mine rejected.
That's the incentive to get started, you know, if I've got
Yeah.
it done.
Oh, so you didn't go up with a blank sheet, somebody?
Exactly.
I know.
Start somewhere.
Matt's making it. I'm making it. I mean, we all did it, so.
Yeah, of those who did not do that.
The smart ones over there didn't do it.
That's-
All right, but any other additional questions, comments, on anything related to? I know 11.1111 is what you wanted to jump into. Jeff, anything kind of before then? Okay. 1111, recall.
So the only question I had on the recall was on section 11.11.11. 11.11.11 was the timing. It says the recall election shall be held not less than 45 days or more than 90 days from the determination of sufficiency. But if it's going to be within 180 days after the submission, even if a special election or if a regular elections happens, then you have to wait till the next regular election. But you have to wait the first 6 months when someone gets elected before you can file a recall petition. Seems like you're all the way. You have like a 3-month window there that you can actually do it in that first year or so. It feels like an awful long time or an awful delay there, and I get part of it is driven by the cost of not having a special election, I guess, but it still seems.
Which one are you?
Where are you reading from?
11, 11, 11.
11.
Yeah.
11, 11, 11.
Which one do you disagree with most, Jeff? The 6-month waiting period, or?
No, the waiting period's standard. It's if it's within, no more than, within a regular.
But just other side of the coin, the scenario that the 6-month waiting period is only going to happen like after an election, right?
There wouldn't be an election the next year normally.
Right.
Your
Right.
term.
Yeah.
So you would,
Right.
the regular election that the 180 days is referring to would be 2 years from when
years,
that
right.
person was elected.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So the window is
Got it.
bigger.
Perfect.
Can I go back to a couple things? Just clarification on 11.11.2. Can you explain that? I mean, that seems very specific. The petition shall name not less than 3 and not more than 5 registered electors. I mean, how did they come up with that and why?
That's state law.
Those 3 and 5?
Yeah, because I remember checking that because I had the same wow, those
Okay,
are
okay.
interesting numbers, but yeah, I checked, yeah.
Okay, and then 4, if it's declined by the town clerk, can it be updated and then resubmitted? If the town clerk's saying, no, I'm not approving this because of whatever reason, can the petitioners fix it, change it, and then resubmit it?
It's a great question.
Or does the clock start over again and it's a new petition at that point? Huh.
Yeah, so that's as to form. So that's at the very beginning, right? So it's your form is not good. So yeah, you could resubmit a new form. Yeah. So that's not a signature issue. So they come in, is my petition form okay? The clerk's like, no. And they fix it and they come right back with a new petition form. Does that answer your question?
And where,
Yeah,
sorry,
if the
where is that?
recall petition is disapproved as to form, the clerk shall state the basis for disapproval.
Specific basis.
It's like the form template.
Yeah.
Like when you go to collect those signatures, it has to follow a certain template guideline that's like,
Okay.
I'm
But
not
then-
gathering these illegally, and it's like I'm the
Yeah,
one
it's
who's
got
gathering
all
these.
these
It's got all these
warnings in
caveats.
it
Yeah.
and how it looks and what all the little lines have to have and everything like that. So you haven't even collected signatures. You're just getting the clerk to say,
Oh,
is
I
this
see. So the
form
clerk would say,
okay?
no, this is what you need to do. And then
Right,
oh, okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Because as you're passing the thing around, it has to. You don't have to flip to the front cover to read what I'm signing. It's like all right there.
Okay.
So
All right.
it's the approval that triggers any dates, correct? Not the submittal. In terms of timing? It should be the approval that triggers any dates, to your point.
It's the determination. You mean like election? Determination of the sufficiency triggers the dates.
Right.
Right.
So
So when it comes back all signed, the town
Yeah.
clerk then looks at it again and looks at the signatures. Yeah.
there's no, I can't even remember what the times are. So there's no days between accepting the form and getting the signatures? I thought there was some.
30
limitation.
in 7.
Town clerk shall-
Any signatures on the more than 30 days have elapsed between the date the petition was approved by the town clerk
So it is
and the date of
approved that's-
signature.
so it's the
Mhm.
approved that's triggered.
Yeah, so there's lots of
Good, okay.
dates and timelines. and-
So it doesn't really matter if they have
Yeah.
to do it 5 times, they're not losing anything.
Right, okay. And then just the only other thing is that in section 6 there, the 25% I think is good.
You think is good?
I do.
I think so too. I debate this one a lot, but
Recall is a serious
It
thing,
is a very serious thing, yeah.
so I think there's got to be enough people. It's like the 2/3, we talked about in the previous meeting. I think in this case, that's a good.
I think so too. I just haven't studied other charters.
And it's state law already.
State law.
Oh,
It
there we go.
is. And it's the entire vote cast, so that's slightly different
That's
than the.
lower
initial
than the
referendum.
population.
Very true. It's a big
So that
difference.
number,
Yeah.
well, all the numbers are gonna fluctuate, but
Yeah.
that one's a different standard, so,
No, that's a huge difference, because
Yeah.
we usually get 40% voter turnout maybe, so
yeah.
it really is almost, yeah.
Any other?
It might be one reason why the percentage is slightly higher, because the voter turnout's
Yeah.
lower.
Makes sense.
Looking at 1111, but 3, I think it's the one we didn't touch on yet. I just need some grammar help here. The recall petition shall include a statement in,
Of-
not more than,
Yeah.
I just put a question mark, so, and maybe a comma might be nice, but
It's the wrong prepositional phrase.
something.
Would we want to change it to of no more than instead of?
Yes.
Of not more?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Again, grammar.
Yep. No, that's important.
That's why you're the secretary. Oh, did I say that too loud?
You want to throw the gavel at him?
Any other comments on 11? All right, we can move on to Article 12, open space and trails.
The first section, 12.01, is this in the OSAC, like charter or bylaws or?
Can I? Oh, I apologize that I haven't been at your earlier meetings. I'm be at most of them moving forward, so whether that's a good thing or not, it's up to you. But I'm not, trying to understand why this section's in the charter.
Because Erie put one in? Or-
Yeah, it was apparently a very big issue
Yes.
for Erie.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
This has been this is, I think, one of the big discussion items
Yes.
that the Charter
Okay.
Committee's been wanting to
Yeah.
discuss, is the merits of this.
So at a high level, I mean, I don't know how people see this section as a high level. maybe.
Mike's off.
I don't know how people have seen this section at a high level, but I think there's two sides that come into my mind on this. One, there's sort of, number one, we've called this open space and trails, and I know you guys in the previous reading or looked and said, hey, it shouldn't have the trails part of it because it's open space. There's sort of this, what are we doing with the open space fund piece of it, and how is that managed, right? And then there's this goodwill nature of open space in general that the town looks at. I think part of some of the other charters have had this because they want to be good stewards to the land and everything else. But I think we have sort of the added dynamic of, the open space funds for, I don't know if it's Ryan who looked it up, has specific uses for those funds, which could get confused elsewhere, and how do you separate those out as well comes into play. And so I don't really, that's sort of the difficulty with this whole section in general when you look at everything, because you can say, oh, if it's trails, do you take open space funds to go, go repave the trails in Rock Creek? And, short answer would be no, because that's not what they're used for per the ballot language, right? So there's kind of the two sides of it that we have to look at and consider, I think.
I had a chance to speak to a home rule commissioner from Erie to ask, because I know that was a question, people wondering why this was in there. And he told me the commissioners felt that it was vital to the character of the town. That, as I said, the tax goes up for a vote every 5 years, and every year they have more of an overwhelming majority that passes it because it's so popular. They felt that it was so important to the character of their town that they wanted to make this permanent. Their home rule commission was unanimous in their consent for including this section. They didn't want to leave it to the whims of a future board to make changes to this kind of thing. Let's see. They just said the charter represents a higher level of philosophy than the code, and they wanted to put those guardrails on it. I will say you know, Boulder has had the fund since 1967. Open space has strongly, provisions around open space have strongly shaped the character of this area and the desirability of the area. Boulder has set that precedent for many decades, and Louisville followed suit, and so did Erie. And I think it's important that we communicate that we are in line with the values of our community.
So just devil's advocate, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but that's the values of this community now, but in 100 years from now. So I guess they could change the charter, though. They could just take it to a vote and they could change it. Okay. Never mind.
There's been no successful charter amendments approved.
This is actually one of the few areas looking at and comparing a couple of different charters, and maybe this will be unpopular, but actually looking at Boulder's charter in this open space section, there's actually a section I thought of adding in here, and it specifically relates to the disposal of open space. Boulder has, I thought, a fairly succinct section on the process for the disposal of open space. And I thought, given the verbiage of this section right now, we have a decent amount of details on the purchasing of open space. I thought it could be a good companion after that fact for including some details on the disposal of open space. In Boulder's charter, let me pull it up, it's section 177. I think some of the language can be even tightened a little bit more and modified specifically for Superior, but I thought this section could kind of tie the bow almost on this open space section if we include stipulations on the disposal of open space.
Claire, did they talk about 13.08 severability? The Erie people?
1308?
Let's see.
13? I mean, do we want to jump down to 13?
Sorry.
Okay.
I thought we were.
12?
I thought that was an open space. I'm sorry, I scrolled too far.
I was like, whoa.
I don't know.
Sorry, my bad.
Man, he wants to get
Are you talking about?
That's not on the agenda. You can't do that.
Never mind.
Oh,
I
okay.
skipped ahead too far.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Would anyone be opposed, at least because this is an initial reading, and I know the Boulder Charter isn't one we reference too often, but would anyone be opposed to just including in a note on the side at the very end, look at or reference section 177, disposal of open space?
So there is a section that just basically says you can't dispose of it without going to the vote. So,
Not
I mean,
exactly in Boulder, it's a little different.
No, I'm saying
Yeah.
in here, there is a
There
section
is,
that
yeah.
addresses severability. The question is whether you want to change the severability requirements, because I know they do a lot of horse trading and other things, I believe, right? I'm not sure we're in that scenario in terms of what we have at all. So it may be overkill for what our 4 square miles allows us. But certainly throw it in there, we can read it.
But the severability piece in 12.02.3, which is basically disposing of
Sorry, yeah.
open space, isn't that already in the ballot language, which was passed by the voters? So the ballot language says you can't change that unless you go back to the voters.
Well, that's where, and I thought, and again, this is why I thought we can include this as an item and revisit it at the next meeting after having some time. The purpose for detailing that explicitly is there's probably a lot of people who are unfamiliar with the ballot language itself, and in 50, 100 years might really be unfamiliar with it too. So that is one of the areas where I thought it'd be good just to maybe remind individuals succinctly about the purpose of just kind of the ballot language
Yeah, I
that
would
was passed.
appreciate the opportunity to read the City of Boulder's
Yeah.
charter. And, you know, to Erie's point, if they have to go back for renewal every 5 years, I can see why they would want to put that language in their charter, because that's an extra layer of protection. But we have that protection already built in.
It's odd to me that they would do that, because, I mean, in 15 years, if they don't have funding for it, but you've got all this infrastructure here in their charter.
Well, it does
And
also say that even if that tax levy goes away, the town has to find other sources of funding. They feel pretty strongly about it.
they have to find other funding. What does that mean? I mean, do they have to cut
They have to have a fund.
Water.
water? Yep.
So it feels to me that the section needs to have a couple things. If we want to include, these are our values about open space, and a lot of this has, the plant protection and stuff like that. I think that's one area about, how we're good stewards of the land and stuff. I think there's part of it's that. I think there's another section that's sort of the logistics of the fund and what it can, separating the fund as well as separating open space, because those are two very different things. To your point about the fund, I will give you an example from a former staff employee who came with a presentation that said, well, if it's a ball field, it's open, so it's open space, so we can spend the open space tax dollars on it. And, we kind of reaction was that, well, 99% of the people who ever lived in Boulder County do not see open space as just being a park. And so I think you do have to have some guardrails in there in terms of what it's been to maybe reassert what the messages around the ballot language were specifically, because it can be construed of what open space is and what the intent for the vote. So yes, 100 years from now, open space can change, but the vote was approved 100 years prior as to what the uses and funding would be for that.
And in that example, doesn't that then speak to the values of that community at that point in time? And so another community may not value a ball field as open space, but Lakewood, as an example, does.
Well, I don't know what they use the funds for.
So I'm just saying it becomes a values conversation around what do we value as open space? And some communities say, well, that's no development. Other communities might say, well, open space is where anybody can go out and recreate, and that might include ball fields.
Right. So are you saying we should include what our definitions are then? Because
no, I'm just saying that I think there's a distinction in that example that you provided, that's a community value that had to be discussed. Is a ball field seen as open space as intended by the voters, or is that, an interpretation?
Well, that goes back to the ballot language, right, and the stretching of what that language is. And so we're at the point to define how we see that, right? Technically, I believe it was pretty well defined in the ballot language, which was why it was so easy to squash that argument per se. But it was an argument that was made to your point of the ballot language will protect us. Not always the case. So putting the values forward of what it is, I think is important.
Yeah,
So again,
we had the discussion on our board about.
Oh, you did as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I could see it coming forward again.
right.
Well,
Because there's a lot of, it's an unlimited,
It's an unlimited tax.
Right.
It's unlimited funding for buying open space, of which there will eventually be no more to buy because you've bought it all. And so maintaining becomes I think maintaining and perhaps, re-amenitizing, in 100 years, there may be, they want more pickleball courts and.
And that's where perfect example of saying, that's when you basically go with ballot language to say, can these funds given, whereas all these funds are now used, there's no more land to be bought as open space, blah, 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 right? Now, can we use this for, without no new taxes, can we use it for Parks and Rec? Can we use it for something else? Because it's exactly the scenario. But keeping our definitions of open space up front in the charter.
I tend to agree. And Claire, I've thought about this a lot. I think what I'm not comfortable with is defining in the charter, to Clint's point, we may buy all the open space and then have this tax in perpetuity. Maybe there's maintenance that needs to be covered, but
That's part of
maybe not for all the capital purchase, right? So what I'd be comfortable with is not defining the specificity of how it gets funded, but rather say that this is a core value. We're not going to sell, it's going to be, I want to make it hard to get rid of open space and define it clearly so it can't be reallocated. But if we buy all the open space and the people we get this giant pool of a fund that can't be purchasing more new open space, but only maintaining it, that will just irritate people down the line.
But that's a ballot language. And that can be, we could do that tomorrow if we want to change the use of it.
But what I kind of want to do is put the guardrails around, we're keeping this, it's a core value of the town.
Well, that's where I was thinking with what I was thinking about with including some specific language on the disposal of open space. Because I do
Okay,
think.
now I get what you're going.
Yeah, because I do think looking at it from a geographic perspective, I mean, we have the map kind of right there. We can think there's only so much open space that we can purchase kind of around the area. But I think to your point with kind of guardrails, if we detail a little bit more explicitly on what the steps would be for any sort of potential for disposal of open space that we have right now. And in reading some of the other charters, I just personally kind of liked the language that Boulder had with it. It seemed like there was enough adequate safeguards there, notifications to the public as well about this. It didn't like forbid, like there was no way on earth that you can ever sell any sort of open space, but it required quite a bit of like explicit mechanisms such as like the public hearing and public comment. So I thought that would be good to focus on. It's still, to me, it kind of towed the line pretty adequately with the town maybe adjusting those values, addressing what open space might be used for in the future, but also still bearing in mind the public right now and their commitment to open space. Because I do think if we don't have a section on open space, or we got rid of this for whatever reason and we put this to the voters and they think, oh, you had the chance to protect open space and you didn't, I think that would, or didn't put any sort of safeguards, that would be a pretty,
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, and a pretty big pill to swallow.
Can I, just a backup question on the open space fund, the tax. Do we have the ability to go back to the voters and say, we want to keep the tax in place, but we want to reallocate where it goes to?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then question for Matt. At the beginning of Article 12 conversation, you had said, why is this in here? What is, why? Why did you ask that? Is this something that the staff doesn't think it should be in there, that it's too much, or is there?
I think there's, I mean, some of the section could stay in. I mean, we have an open space advisory committee. We have the voter-approved ballot language, dedicated sales tax for open space. Bonds were used to buy that open space, so you can't dispose of it anyways because
You have to pay the voters back.
yeah, exactly. So I wasn't sure. I mean, but I hear the core value thing too, so.
But can that be done somewhere else without having a whole article? Because I tend to agree with that, but I'm not saying I want to just take this out of there, but I agree if we want to simplify this, do we have to have it in there?
Chris, can I chime in? Because my question was similar to what you just asked Matt. My question when going through this is, and I love where everyone's going on this, is how do we also look at the other, are there other commissions we need to look at or values when it comes to ACEs or to other areas in which our community is focused on? So I respect this and love this, but are there other areas, or is that preamble, or is the, there's a lot of ways I could go here.
Agree.
I think that's a good point. I guess my argument would be that this is such an entrenched value and such it's made such an impact in this area and defining our area, and there's such a long history that has the municipalities surrounding us have chosen to elevate open space and to put those guardrails around it, and I think that we should communicate that we are in alignment that way. So otherwise we're saying we're not in alignment,
So,
Do we want to bring the 5.02, that language, that has been brought forward?
Yeah, I have a note. Did you want me to actually bring
Okay.
it down?
Or we just,
no, it's
once
good
the
enough. We'll see
document.
it, we'll see it in the update.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, I know we talked about it, I just wanted to re-mention that.
So it feels like to me, what I think I hear, right, is that certainly a section on kind of the values and the core values around open space is one section of this. There's probably, in my thought, there's a secondary section which would be kind of the open space funding piece with the open space fund that we've talked about and what it's used for, right? And then the third would tie back to the open space advisory committee, which could cover different types of open space. It would cover the gambit of all the open space, because without defining what the label is right now, there's certainly a label for the open space that was bought with the open space fund of certain things, and then there's other people's considerations of open space. We have parks and open space and other things, and how we address those. And I don't know whether we have to include the shared buying and all that stuff that we've done with other municipalities in this section or not, but it seems like those 3 sections cover open space. Yeah.
And in the resolutions establishing the park committee and the open space committee, they went through that and what each of those committees oversees. And that might help with the definition here too.
Yeah, we had a separate open space advisory in ProStack, but I don't know, they got merged together at some point in time, so I don't know how that language changed for that.
The biggest change there was a clarification between the committees. Trails was one of those components.
Right.
Who oversees trails? So
Yeah.
we can send that language to the commission too.
Yeah, that'd be good.
What do you think about, so if we were to leave this in there, if that's going to be the choice, I mean, we could trim this down. I mean, the whole 12.01 doesn't, I mean, that's just saying what the purpose of the committee is. And if we're going to leave that, I would change it from board to committee. But I think that whole first 12.01, subsection 1, 2, and 3 could all be taken out. And then 12.02
You mean
designated open space.
subsections A, B, C?
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I didn't bring the one that you updated, so I'm still on number 1, 2, and 3. Sorry about that. But, I mean, I think 12.02 designated open space. The town shall establish and maintain an inventory of vacant land. Okay, I think that's reasonable to keep in because that states what Claire is saying and that the town is pretty much passionate about, so I think that's good. But then some of these others, do we need to keep those in there? I haven't read through them again. But anyway, that would be, if we're going to keep it,
Yeah.
that would be my recommendation, is to trim it down and take that whole thing about the committee. That's elsewhere, and I don't think we need that.
But doesn't some of that, Claire, cover the values piece in there that you want to keep in there?
So when we move 5.02 down, it's gonna probably alter that first one,
Yeah.
right? Because you're considering some language that's, it has, is, I think it's so long as the special fund,
Right.
right? We can take that first section that's there now and kind of combine those into one paragraph.
Should we try it?
Yeah, 5.02 is the town shall maintain an open space advisory committee so long as there's special fund for the open space. So that sort of
And then it can
covers-
go on to
Yeah.
say like, this is what it does, this
Yep.
is our goal, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that could be good. And then also maybe address some potential redundancy too.
And that's when we can look at the resolution as well. So
Yeah.
That's why I feel like you kind of have to have a values section and then the guardrail section.
And some more
Right,
specifics
the specifics
as you
in
go.
there.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I mean, it's a page and a half right now is written.
Doesn't need to be, I agree, it doesn't maybe need to be quite that long, but I think there are certain things that we probably can all agree on.
I mean, if this is one of our fundamental values, I don't think it's a page and a half out of 36 is so horrible. I mean,
That's a good point.
I mean, to your,
I guess you're right, the other articles are at least that long.
right, I mean, it's,
Yeah, this is pretty short.
I mean, it's not,
But just to be clear, they're trying to cover for some shortfalls in Erie's ordinances, right? Whereas Jeff says there's no sunsetting.
well, I'm not
when I
thinking about it that way. I'm thinking it is just our core value.
Yeah.
It's trying to document what the core values are to say, you know what?
He said
And I
that,
think we can do both. I think we can address the core value, but at the same time, take out the piece that's not relevant to us because we have.
our situation's
Our
Our
different.
situation is very
Different than Erie,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said this language is essentially the same as what's in their municipal code and in their comprehensive plan. The reason they decided to repeat it here was really just so that it would live on for a long time, to make it more binding.
Yeah.
And so then the only other caveat I'd put in the guardrailing language around the ballot is unless it's changed at a future date, because just sort of leaving that as an option that it could change at a future date with that ballot, unless going to the voters to approve different usage for the funds, something along those
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah.
We can-
Well, let me ask you that. Do you really want to adjust the use of the funds in here? Or do you just want to leave it in the ballot language that is already?
I would leave it in the ballot language.
And then you only have to go back and
Yeah, right.
address that issue with
Yeah.
the.
You want to reference the ballot language or?
No?
No.
Like, no money in this, like,
See, I think see, this is sort of redefining, it goes back to reaffirming what the ballot language is. That's the guardrail to say, well, that's open. It's open space. We can go build a park on it. Or, hey, you know what? It's a trail, so we can go build a BMX course across open space, right? I mean, it's what do you want to do, right?
Well, you fended off that argument in the past by referencing the ballot language, right?
If that's what you guys want to do, I just think you're missing.
I'm asking.
I think
That's it.
no, we fended off because we were on the board and we could argue that that wasn't the case with the particular staff member, right? So I mean, that was because we were the board doing it. If you're a citizen doing it, that's a very different scenario than being a board member doing that. Because as a board, we just say, no, we don't want to go down the path. We don't go down that path because.
Just said no.
Yeah, we can just say no because. But as a citizen, you want to have something to stand on to say, hey, look, this is how it is. This is in our charter. This is going forward. It's just reaffirming. It's reaffirming what that ballot language is about.
So you would want to include some of the ballot language here?
I don't know if it's the ballot language, but again, it goes back to the guardrail of what open space is and the open. I think it's in part of this.
Define what
right?
it is.
I don't know what the terminology is.
Yeah,
Maybe it comes up in some of the ProStack definitions, but it's at one point it was undeveloped open space or. I forget the terms now that were used, but they've
I think
changed.
that's reasonable to define what we mean by open space.
Because that's what the open space fund is for,
Yeah.
maintenance and usage around natural open space.
Would you define it in this section, though, or in the definition section? Are we going to do
don't have a
that?
I don't have a definition.
Are we not going to do that?
No.
So just keep it around open space. It's all, I mean, there's sort of the three sections of open space that way.
So I don't know, just kind of bearing time in mind, and we will have another chance to kind of review this section. Are there any kind of key sections within this article that anyone has like very clear points or recommendations on updating the language so we can make note of it?
I would
for second read?
recommend striking 12.03.
Striking that entirely?
Yeah. To me, that's a management function, which should be the town manager and their staff figuring out where that function best lies.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I get it, says,
Yeah.
or its successor department, but.
I agree.
Any thoughts with that?
Dalton, is there, I haven't studied Article 12 as it's written. Is there disposal in here? Have you studied that yourself?
The
I think
reason.
that's a great point.
Yeah, so that's why I recommended it, and that's why I think, because this is the first reading, we'll come back to this. We can look at the language from Boulder's, put that in after, I thought, the purchase of open space. To me, that almost kind of made sense, just including the disposal.
How do you dispose?
And it kind of, for me, when I was thinking about this, it was like, that maybe ties a bow on this section, because you are looking at the purchase of open space. I kind of think, I don't know how much additional purchasing we're going to be doing in the future, but I do think the disposal of such is something, bearing kind of that longevity of this charter in mind, is something that residents might want to think about, and they might want to be mindful of different safeguards that are in place with this. And the language that I liked with Boulder's was, it doesn't say you can't dispose of open space, but it just really reiterated, like, the public will have buy-in, the public will have a say on this and be notified of it too.
Okay.
And just as a clarification, are you referencing the city of Boulder's open space or Boulder County's?
City. Okay. Yep.
So you're actually, and I haven't seen Boulder's charter, but whatever their process is doesn't require voter approval.
It doesn't.
No.
So you're lessening that restriction. That's your thought.
I don't know. We're going to look at the language.
Well,
and
yeah,
I'm
that's
just
what I was-
saying, okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Because
Okay.
I think there's some limitations that we would have based on the ballot language of how we.
Yeah, I mean,
Versus not.
I can read this entire paragraph if you
No, no,
want, or I
that's-
thought we could just
I
put
just
it
wanted-
in and then
okay.
have discussions later.
I fundamentally think that all of these sections really are not going to be written the way they are right now. So I don't think it's wordsmithing these. I think it's sort of saying,
Yeah.
is there a way to
Yeah.
craft this to cover those three main topics? Maybe those are three main sections, however you want to call it, right? And maybe the purchase and, I guess, Matt, have we received any other open space from, you know, as donations or anything, or is the only open space that we have that we're controlling all been bought with the tax funds?
There's still open space that's received through developments.
As parks, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No, yeah. I mean, Tract H is in downtown Superior, which is now, I forget what, Vista Ridge, I think, open space, is the most recent.
Is that considered open space?
Yeah.
Okay. Tract H is the creek?
Between Waterford and downtown
The
Superior.
300 feet.
Oh, right.
300 feet,
They
yeah.
count.
Isn't it supposed to be 50? Just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
250.
Just
So
joking.
12,
Jeff,
we're
can
talking
you-
about 1202 subsection 3. We're primarily talking about the sale of the property, but some of this other language, rezoned, redesignated, placed into any other land category, I think that's, I think removing the voter approval, I mean, we can look at the Boulder language for sold, but I think we ought to be very careful about all these other restrictions because, you know, you can think about, well, what if you need a trailhead? You know, you've got some open space, you want to have a trailhead, or you want to have you want to carve out a little piece of it to activate it or do something. And I don't want to box the town into a corner. It's like, nope, you got to go to voter approval to put a porta potty there or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think those are all accepted uses of open space. So.
Well, that's why I would be fine kind of adjusting this language and potentially even striking it in favor of having this specific
Okay.
section on the
Let's-
disposal
yeah,
of
let's look at that.
open space. Because I did like bearing in mind kind of the flexibility that it offered with it and voter approval. And there are maybe certain, like to your point, kind of with the trailheads, there are maybe certain minor sections where you don't need the voter approval. Obviously, if you're going through the entire process of eliminating like acres and acres of open space, you would still need to communicate and have these safeguards in place to address that. And I think having a section on that right after the purchase of open space, to me, just kind of made sense.
Sorry, really quick. I understand that we co-own some space with the county. I haven't really studied this, like I said, but is there any weirdness with co-owned space and how we consider some of this language? Like, and how far can we push that? Can we say if it's co-owned, they have to seek our approval before redesignating it?
So, yeah.
Depends on how it's co-owned.
Yeah, typically it's a conservation easement. Either we pay for a conservation easement or the county or somebody. Coyote Ridge is our most recent purchase. There's a conservation easement with Jefferson County and Boulder County. So if you want to have any new uses, you have to get approval from the counties for that. Or if you want to dispose of it, you have to get approval from counties for that. So really you can't do anything that's stated in the conservation easement without getting their approval.
What if they try to do the reverse and do something with that co-owned land?
They would need our approval.
Need our approval, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because those are actually in our town boundaries as well, so yeah, they would need our approval from that
Just
standpoint.
want to make sure.
No, that's fine, that's good.
So-
So, okay.
I reviewed this right before I came, and with Boulder, they've got a 5-person board that, open space board that's appointed by the city council. In order to dispose of land that's designated as open space, 3 of the 5 have to approve of it, so not even the entire board has to approve. And then I think it goes out for public notice for something like 30, 45 days, and then the public has the opportunity to try to challenge that. So it's really, the onus is on the people to challenge it rather than the other way around, having to get voter approval. So I think that does provide like some flexibility for the town to be able to rezone or repurpose.
That's very similar with the Boulder section, actually.
That's what
that
I was, yeah, referencing.
So I'd just look if there's any way we can get a legal read on what, since these were bought under a specific ballot language. Thank you. What restrictions there are in terms of reclassifying or other things. I don't know if there's anything, once you do that, it's part of, again, as a part of a fund as well, or I don't know how, what guidelines are there?
I can look at it for you,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I have the ballot language, but I think I need to look at it a little bit carefully and know a little bit more about it, because like, I'm not seeing a definition of open space in that ballot
Right.
question, so I don't know exactly where that definition is coming from, whether it's just been town practice or interpretation of that ballot.
Well, this is why I want the guidelines to say what we've all
So-
done, because it's been challenged a couple
I
times.
think Kendra's done a memo on this.
Has she?
I'll look-
Okay.
I'll look for it.
Okay. I
'Cause
suspect.
we may be restricted on selling that land anyways, because it was already bought with taxpayer dollars for a specific purpose, so
Okay.
there may be restrictions anyways.
You had mentioned 3 different sections. Can you repeat that?
Well, I think one is sort of what, the overarching
general.
value section, right? One is
Okay.
about the guardrails, and the third one would be sort of the committee recommendations and things that they're doing to help manage it.
What was the second
then-
one? Sorry.
Second one is the guardrails on the ballot language. What is open space? What it can be used for?
Definitions.
Yeah.
And then,
You know, and maybe it's just strictly the open space fund and talks about that, because like Matt said, we've gotten other open space, we have other trails, all those things are part of the greater whole of our open space package. A subset of our open space package is what's been purchased under the ballot language. And, you know, it's for maintenance, buffers, and open space.
Well, I think just also bearing time in mind, is everyone all right with maybe wrapping this up in terms of conversation goes? We'll be able to review, we'll have some additional information for our next meeting specifically on open space, but we do have additional agenda items too. Is that all right with everyone?
Dalton, can I just ask a question? So if this is becoming a value of ours, can we think broader?
Sure.
Just between now and the next time we look at this? Again, I'm not disagreeing with anything. I think we're on a great path. I just feel like we're boxing ourselves into one value. And I think each of us would probably pick one more to name as our other core values in our community. So I just want to make sure we think kind of a little broader.
And you mentioned one earlier. And
Well, and I'm not a huge sustainability person, but that is a huge focus of our city of Boulder, Boulder County, all of our us in East Boulder County.
Yep.
I mean, I can sit here and we could talk about economic development and businesses too. I mean, but I'm not sure this is the right place for that. I just want to make sure we're thinking a little broader.
Yeah, absolutely.
you.
Of course. All right.
Do you want to take an action to send a list, or if people have some ideas of core values they want to put out, so we can start thinking about that as well?
So, well, on that note, so the next agenda item is what you're going to be talking about. I need you to start thinking about your preamble. Because that's probably going to be on the agenda for next time, along with 13 and 14, which are your last 2 articles. So you need to start thinking about that preamble and bullet points, and she's practically drafted it, it's all done, and so, yeah, you need to start thinking about that, so.
So I will grab, I asked Catherine this question, so I will grab the list that I've made notes of sections and share that with Martin and Lydia as far as the notes. Is that
That's
proper and okay?
Yep,
And then
that's fine.
let them direct us from there.
Yeah.
So just a question about the preamble. I know we can't talk about this offline, but having something to react to rather than try to collectively write a preamble from the dais, I think is going to take a long time. So it would be easier if one of us tried to draft that and then we can all react to that next time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. I drafted a preamble because I thought that would be the very first item that we were talking about.
I'm
So
sorry.
I am happy to reference that.
Send it around.
It's a starting point.
Yeah, and we can use it as a potential starting point too. So I'd be happy
Add it.
adding that. We can discuss that at the next meeting along with Articles 13 and 14.
Yep.
But how does that sound? Articles 13, 14 preamble, and then second reading for everything we discussed today?
And I suspect open space is the second of 3 readings probably, because something tells me we'll need a third one on that one.
We'll see. We'll see how productive we are at the next meeting. We got through a lot today.
Yes, you're on schedule for a public hearing in early April if you want, so.
So you're not going to delete this preamble, you're just going to add what you had in there?
Yeah, I can go in and add
Okay.
And
my
then we
preamble.
can look at
Yeah.
Pick and choose. Okay, and same thing with the other language.
Get our preamble to 52 words or less.
I thought you said 5 pages.
I wrote 50. No, don't worry, I didn't do that. But all right. I think bearing that in mind, all the agenda items set for our next meeting, I call a motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion?
Motion, whatever you want to call it.
Second? Thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.
Nice job. Good work.